The journey begins in the quiet, shadow-draped halls of the city of Lumiere, a place where the air is thick with the scent of old paper, cold stone, and the heavy, lingering taste of white paint. This is the world of the expedition, a group of people who have lived their entire lives under the shadow of the Paintress, a being who wakes up once a year to paint a number on a massive monolith. Every time she paints a new number, everyone of that age instantly turns to ash and vanishes from the world. This experience is defined by the weight of the counting clock, where the atmosphere is one of stifling silence and constant loss. This part of the history is a story of the number 33, a realization that the Paintress has just finished her latest work, and now everyone who is 33 years old has been erased. The air here is sharp and carries the taste of salt, dust, and the faint chemical sting of wet oil paint. The sound of the world is a low and constant echo. As the survivors walk through streets filled with empty clothes and abandoned tools, making the entire city feel like a colossal, hollow shell that is waiting for its own end. As Gustave, the leader of the 33rd expedition, stands at the edge of the city walls, the atmosphere shifts to one of quiet and hardened resolve. He finds that the world outside the city is a landscape of strange colors and twisted shapes, a place where the very laws of nature seem to have been brushed onto the earth by a giant hand. This is the era of the final march, where the atmosphere is one of faded sunlight and growing shadows. You see the way the tall grass ripples in colors that shouldn't exist, deep purples, neon blues, and blood reds, a reminder that the world is no longer a natural place. This part of the history is a story of the last chance, a realization that if this expedition fails to find and stop the Paintress, there will be no one left to remember what it was like to be human. The sound of the wind through the strange trees is a high and whistling note, a sign that the land itself is watching them. Gustave moves with a steady and heavy might, his boots clicking on the stone path as the pale glow of the monolith reflects the gray determination in his eyes. Deep within the outskirts of the sunken forest, the atmosphere becomes damp, dim, and still. The trees here are not made of wood, but of a substance that looks like dried acrylic, their branches frozen in midair as if they were caught in a single moment of a painting. This is the trial of the first step, where the atmosphere becomes one of visual confusion and hidden threats. Gustave and his team must navigate the thick undergrowth while their minds struggle to make sense of the shifting perspective of the land. The sound of the leaves under their feet is a sharp and brittle snap, making the forest feel like a fragile glass house. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the world of the Paintress, they must learn to see the brushstrokes. He feels the cool humidity on the skin and the sharp ache of the pack on his shoulders, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the center of a clearing filled with white statues, the group encounters the first of the Paintress's creations, a being made of swirling ink and jagged canvas that moves with a jerky, unnatural grace. The fight is a story of the steel against the ink. The atmosphere is violent, muted, and fast, as the creature splashes the ground with a black liquid that eats through the grass like acid. This is the trial of the first conflict, where the atmosphere becomes one of tactical awareness and sudden movement. Gustave must use his blade to cut through the hardened paint, a realization that the enemies they face are literally the thoughts of a god made solid. The sound of the blade hitting the paint is a dull and thudding note, making the clearing feel like it is muffled by a heavy blanket. When the creature finally dissolves into a puddle of gray wash, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and expectant quiet, a realization that they have officially entered the Paintress's domain. Leaving the clearing behind, the journey leads to the edge of the Great Bridge, a massive stone structure that spans a canyon filled with a river of flowing gold light. The atmosphere is vast, windy, and bright, a realization that the beauty of this world is just as dangerous as its monsters. This part of the history is a story of the High Crossing, where the atmosphere is one of vertical risk and distant vistas. You see the way the clouds move in swirls of orange and pink, looking more like a sunset captured on canvas than actual weather. The air is thin and carries the taste of ozone and old stone. The sound of the wind through the bridge's railings is a high and wailing chord, signaling that the roof of the world is a place where there is nowhere to hide. The walk through the Valley of the Lost Colors is a story of the fading memory. You encounter areas where the world has turned completely black and white, as if the paintress had run out of pigment or simply lost interest in that part of the world. This is a moment of raw and stark beauty. The atmosphere is cold and sharp, a realization that without color, the world feels empty and dead. This part of the history is a story of the Grey March, where the expedition must keep their spirits high even as their own skin begins to look pale and washed out. The sound of their own voices in the colorless air is a flat and dead note, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is losing its depth. He moves with a sturdy and careful step, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he looks for the next splash of color on the horizon. Deep in the heart of the first camp, the final trial of the first leg of the journey takes place around a small and flickering fire. The atmosphere is warm, personal, and tense, a realization that every member of the expedition, 33, is someone who knows their time is running out. This is a story of the sovereignty of the human spirit, where they share stories of the people they lost when the numbers 32 and 31 were painted. The conversation is a moment of emotional impact as they realize that they are not just soldiers, but the last living memories of a dying race. The sound of the wood popping in the fire is a rhythmic and comforting snap, signaling that the true strength is found in the bonds they share. The experience in the first territory ends with Gustave standing at the very edge of the campsite, looking toward the distant mountains where the Paintress's tower sits like a dark needle against the painted sky. The shadow of the monolith has led to a sovereignty of the journey. He carries the weight of the people's hope and the silence of the erased. The atmosphere is one of quiet and heavy resolve, a realization that the path to the truth is a path of facing the brush. The focus would now shift to the crystalline peaks, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the previous expeditions into the world of frozen colors and ancient secrets. The final legacy of the first part of the expedition is a story of the beauty in the defiance. You have seen the warriors walk through the forest and the gray valleys to find the strength within their own hearts. You have felt the sting of the cold and the weight of the ticking clock. As the lights of Lumiere fade far behind and the first dark shadows of the mountains appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the first step into the wild, leaving behind the safety of the walls for a world of paint, monsters, and a journey that continues to pulse with the light of the remaining years. The journey moves away from the painted forests and begins the long, grueling ascent into the crystalline peaks. This is a region where the world is no longer soft or fluid, but has hardened into jagged pillars of translucent stone that catch the light like prisms. This part of the history is a story of the frozen time, a realization that the Paintress has used her brush to trap the very air in a state of permanent winter. The atmosphere here is cold, sharp, and brittle, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a sheet of pale blue ice that hums with a strange, internal energy. The air tastes of frost, crushed minerals, and the dry, biting scent of a world that has forgotten the sun. The sound of the world is a high and constant ringing as the wind whistles through the narrow, glass-like canyons, making the entire mountain range feel like a colossal, frozen instrument that is playing a song of mourning for the years already lost. Gustave leads the line, his breath coming in white plumes that vanish into the thin air, realizing that here, the cold is not just weather, it is an eraser. As the team climbs higher, the atmosphere shifts to one of ghostly recognition. They begin to find the remnants of the 32nd expedition, frozen in place like museum exhibits. You see a scout caught in the middle of a step, his face a mask of sudden realization, and a group of soldiers huddled together around a fire that has turned into a solid block of orange crystal. This is the era of the stillborn hope, where the atmosphere is one of stark silence and preserved failure. This part of the history is a story of the echoes of the past, a realization that they are walking over the graves of those who are only 1 year older than themselves. The sound of the ice cracking under Gustave's weight is a sharp and echoing snap, a reminder that the mountain is a fragile place. He moves with a sturdy and careful might, his gloved hands gripping the frozen ledges as the prismatic light of the peaks casts long, distorted shadows of his team against the canyon walls. Deep within the heart of the glass ravine, the atmosphere becomes distorted and claustrophobic. The walls here are so clear that the expedition can see their own reflections 100 times over. But the reflections don't always move when they do. This is the trial of the reflected spirit, where the atmosphere becomes one of paranoia and visual trickery. Gustav must keep the team focused on the path ahead, a realization that the ice is trying to draw their minds into the past. The sound of their own footsteps is amplified into a thunderous and rhythmic beat, making the ravine feel like the inside of a crystal heart. This part of the history is a realization that to conquer the peaks, they must trust the feel of the stone over the sight of the eyes. He feels the biting chill on the cheeks and the steady burn in the calves, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the edge of a frozen waterfall, the group encounters a frost sentinel, a massive creature made of jagged ice shards held together by a core of glowing white paint. The fight is a story of the heat against the frost. The atmosphere is brutal, shrill, and cold as the sentinel slams its crystalline fists into the ground, sending waves of freezing energy through the ice. This is the trial of the hardened will, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast reflexes and brute strength. Gustav must find the cracks in the creature's armor, a realization that even the hardest paint can be shattered if hit with enough conviction. The sound of the sentinel's roar is a high and grating screech, making the air feel like it is shattering into 1,000 pieces. When the creature finally bursts into a cloud of snow and glass, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and numbing calm, a realization that the mountains do not want them there. Leaving the battlefield, the journey leads to the entrance of the Sky Shatter Cave, a tunnel that cuts directly through the highest peak. The atmosphere is dark, low, and echoing, a realization that they are finally leaving the light of the lower world behind. This part of the history is a story of the inner dark, where the atmosphere is one of heavy breath and hidden depths. You see the way the walls are lined with glowing veins of blue pigment, providing just enough light to see the frozen skeletons of ancient beasts trapped in the stone. The air is still and carries the taste of salt and dry dust. The sound of the water dripping from the ceiling is a rhythmic and hollow plink, signaling that the core of the mountain is a place where time moves differently. The walk through the Hall of the Fallen Numbers is a story of the weight of the count. You encounter carvings on the walls that list every number the Paintress has ever painted, a history written in the blood of the ages. This is a moment of raw and historical grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the expedition is just a tiny part of a much larger cycle of death. This part of the history is a story of the record of ash, where the team must walk past the numbers of their parents, their grandparents, and their children. The sound of their boots on the stone floor is a dull and respectful thud, making Gustav feel small and solid in a world that remembers everything. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand tracing the etched numbers as he looks for the number 33, finding it blank and waiting. Deep in the heart of the mountain camp, the final trial of the peaks takes place, as the team huddles together for warmth in a chamber of blue light. The atmosphere is intimate, weary, and resolute, a realization that the thin air is making them dream of the homes they will never see again. This is a story of the sovereignty of the dream, where they talk about what they would do if the clock finally stopped ticking. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they share a meager meal and watch the frost grow on their bedrolls. The sound of the wind howling outside the cave is a low and constant moan, signaling that the true enemy is the hopelessness that comes with the cold. The experience in the crystalline peaks ends with Gustav standing at the far exit of the cave, looking out over the next region, the Crimson Desert. The blue of the ice has led to a sovereignty of the high pass. He carries the weight of the 30-second memory and the silence of the peaks. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of changing colors. The focus would now shift to the burning sands, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the sun into a world of heat, mirages, and the shifting sands of time. The final legacy of the second part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the frozen moment. You have seen the warriors walk through the ice and the glass to find the heat within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the frost and the weight of the past. As the blue glow of the peaks fades behind you and the first red dust of the desert appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the descent from the clouds, leaving behind the silence of the ice for a world of fire, sand, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the freezing silence of the peaks behind and descends into the Crimson Desert, a vast and rolling sea of sand that is the color of fresh blood. This is a place where the Paintress seems to have spilled her most vibrant pigments, creating a land that feels like it is constantly burning, even when the sun is down. This part of the history is a story of the shifting ground, a realization that in the desert, nothing stays the same for long. The atmosphere here is hot, dry, and heavy, and the sand beneath the expedition's boots is as fine as flour and as warm as a hearth. The air tastes of copper, heat, and the parched scent of sun-baked stone. The sound of the world is a low, constant rustle as the wind moves the dunes, making the entire desert feel like a massive, breathing beast that is waiting for the travelers to tire. Gustav leads the line, his cloak pulled tight against the grit, realizing that the heat here is not just a physical force. It is a test of the soul's moisture. As the team pushes further into the red wastes, the atmosphere shifts to one of shimmering deception. The heat creates mirages that look like the gates of Lumiere or the faces of loved ones who were erased years ago. You see the horizon ripple and bend, turning the dunes into a wall of liquid light that makes it impossible to tell where the earth ends and the sky begins. This is the era of the thirsty mind, where the atmosphere is one of blurred reality and constant longing. This part of the history is a story of the false oasis, a realization that the desert is trying to lure them away from the path with the promise of what they have lost. The sound of the wind through the sandstone arches is a soft and hollow moan, a sign that the land is trying to speak in a language they have forgotten. Gustav moves with a steady and heavy power, his eyes fixed on the distant needle of the tower, realizing that to look anywhere else is to be lost. Deep within the valley of the Red Scourge, the atmosphere becomes choking and intense. A sandstorm begins to rise, turning the air into a wall of red dust that clogs the lungs and stings the skin. This is the trial of the blind step, where the atmosphere becomes one of sensory deprivation and internal rhythm. The members of the expedition must tie themselves together with a long, sturdy rope, a realization that the only thing keeping them from the void is the person standing next to them. The sound of the sand hitting their metal armor is a sharp and constant hiss, making the valley feel like the inside of a sand-filled hourglass. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the storm, they must listen to the pull of the rope over the sight of the eyes. He feels the grit between his teeth and the dry heat in his throat, a feeling of total and grounded struggle. At the base of a massive, half-buried hand made of red stone, the group encounters a sandstalker, a creature that looks like a giant scorpion made of hardened clay and jagged canvas. The fight is a story of the steel against the earth. The atmosphere is violent, dry, and gritty as the creature burrows into the sand and disappears, only to strike from below with a tail that drips with a thick, yellow wash. This is the trial of the hidden strike, where the atmosphere becomes one of sudden movement and absolute focus. Gustav must watch the ripples in the sand to predict the creature's path, a realization that the desert itself is the enemy's shield. The sound of the creature's pincers snapping is a loud and earthy thud, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of the soil. When the stalker finally crumbles into a pile of red dust, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and parched stillness, a realization that the desert does not give up its secrets easily. Leaving the battlefield, the journey leads to the edge of the sunken gallery, a canyon where the walls are covered in massive, unfinished paintings of the people who were erased during the number 30. The atmosphere is vast, somber, and grand, a realization that the desert is a graveyard for the Paintress's discarded ideas. This part of the history is a story of the art of the absent, where the atmosphere is one of stark color and deep loss. You see the way the faces in the paintings look down at the expedition with expressions of surprise and grief, their colors still as bright as the day they were painted. The air is still and carries the taste of salt and old pigment. The sound of their own footsteps echoing off the canyon walls is a hollow and respectful beat, signaling that the Gallery of the Lost is a place where time has been stretched thin. The walk through the dunes of the forgotten youth is a story of the fading heart. You encounter areas where the sand is mixed with the white ash of those who vanished, a reminder of the price of the paintress's work. This is a moment of raw and moral weight. The atmosphere is quiet and heavy, a realization that the desert is not just sand, but the remains of 1,000 years of numbers. This part of the history is a story of the white grain, where the team must walk softly so as not to disturb the memory of the fallen. The sound of the ash shifting under their boots is a soft and mournful whisper, making Gustave feel small and solid in a world made of dust. He moves with a sturdy and balanced grace, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he looks at the horizon, finding the red sun sinking into the ground. Deep in the heart of the desert camp, the final trial of the Crimson Sands takes place as the team huddles together under a tapestry of red stars. The atmosphere is intimate, exhausted, and quiet, a realization that the heat of the day has turned into a bone-chilling cold. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared water, where they pass a single canteen around the circle, knowing that every drop is more precious than gold. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they talk about the things they will do if they ever see the green trees of Lumiere again. The sound of the desert fox barking in the distance is a lonely and sharp note, signaling that the true enemy is the vastness that makes their journey feel insignificant. The experience in the Crimson Desert ends with Gustave standing at the far edge of the dunes, looking toward the next region, the Indigo Sea. The red of the sand has led to a sovereignty of the low horizon. He carries the weight of the 33's purpose and the silence of the wastes. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of changing elements. The focus would now shift to the deep blue waters, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the sun into a world of tides, reflections, and the weight of the deep. The final legacy of the third part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the shifting grain. You have seen the warriors walk through the heat and the dust to find the moisture within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the sand and the weight of the mirage. As the red glow of the desert fades behind you and the first blue mist of the sea appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the first sight of the water, leaving behind the dryness of the fire for a world of waves, foam, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the dry heat of the desert behind and reaches the edge of the Indigo Sea, a vast and rolling expanse of water that is a blue so deep it looks like wet ink. This is a place where the Paintress has poured out all the shadows and reflections of the world, creating a liquid landscape that feels like it has no bottom. This part of the history is a story of the floating path, a realization that the earth has ended and the expedition must now trust their lives to the tides. The atmosphere here is cool, misty, and vast, and the air tastes of salt, ozone, and the clean, sharp scent of cold water. The sound of the world is a constant, rhythmic crashing of waves against the black rock cliffs, making the entire shoreline feel like a drum that is beating out the time they have left. Gustav leads the team down to the docks, where a ship made of hardened canvas and whalebone waits for them. Realizing that on the water, you cannot walk away from the truth. As the ship pulls away from the shore, the atmosphere shifts to one of vast isolation. The red dunes of the desert disappear into the mist, leaving the expedition alone in a world of blue on blue. You see the way the water moves in slow, heavy swells that look like curtains of silk being pulled across the floor of the world. This is the era of the liquid mirror, where the atmosphere is one of infinite depth and growing smallness. This part of the history is a story of the deep reflection, a realization that the sea is showing them the ghosts of the cities that were painted away centuries ago. The sound of the hull cutting through the waves is a soft and constant slicing, a sign that the ship is the only solid thing in a world that has turned to fluid. Gustav moves with a steady and balanced power, his hands gripping the wooden railing as he watches the horizon, realizing that the sea is not just water. It is the Paintress's memory. Deep within the channel of the sunken spires, the atmosphere becomes haunting and still. The ship passes over the ruins of a great cathedral that sits just beneath the surface, its stained glass windows glowing with a faint underwater light. This is the trial of the silent witness, where the atmosphere becomes one of reverence and underwater grief. The members of the expedition lean over the side, a realization that they are looking at the world that was lost when the number 50 was painted. The sound of the water lapping against the bone ribs of the ship is a hollow and whispering echo, making the channel feel like a church made of salt. This part of the history is a realization that the sea does not hide the past. It preserves it in a cold, blue light. He feels the damp mist on his skin and the slow roll of the deck beneath his boots, a feeling of total and grounded observation. At the center of a swirling whirlpool of white foam, the group encounters a tide reaper, a massive creature made of tangled kelp, shipwrecks, and hardened blue pigment that rises from the depths like a storm. The fight is a story of the harpoon against the wave. The atmosphere is violent, wet, and roaring as the creature slams its watery limbs onto the deck, trying to pull the expedition into the dark. This is the trial of the heavy current, where the atmosphere becomes one of unsteady ground and desperate strength. Gustav must use the ship's ballista to fire bolts of iron into the creature's liquid heart, a realization that the sea itself can be wounded if you strike the right spot. The sound of the creature's roar is a deep and gurgling thrum, making the air feel like it is drowning in the sound. When the reaper finally collapses back into the foam, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and salty calm, a realization that the ocean is a jealous guardian of the path, leaving the whirlpool behind. The journey leads to the edge of the phosphorescent bay, where the water begins to glow with a soft neon light that illuminates the dark from below. The atmosphere is vast, dreamlike, and ethereal, a realization that they have entered the night painting of the world. This part of the history is a story of the light from below, where the atmosphere is one of glow and wonder. You see the way the fish move like streaks of white paint through the deep blue, their bodies leaving trails of light that look like stars in a liquid sky. The air is cool and carries the taste of salt and fresh rain. The sound of the water dripping from the oars is a rhythmic and musical plink, signaling that the glow path is a place where the world is trying to be beautiful one last time. The walk across the deck during the midnight watch is a story of the final horizon. You encounter the silence of the crew as they look up at the moon, which is the only thing the Paintress has never touched. This is a moment of raw and natural stillness. The atmosphere is somber and vast, a realization that the sea is the widest grave they have ever crossed. This part of the history is a story of the Blue Watch, where the team must stay awake to keep the ship on course through the shifting currents of the ink. The sound of the sails snapping in the wind is a sharp and hopeful note, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world made of ghosts. He moves with a sturdy and careful grace, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he looks at the dark waves, finding the first light of the morning breaking through the fog. Deep in the heart of the ship's hold, the final trial of the Indigo Sea takes place as the team huddles together in a chamber of creaking wood. The atmosphere is intimate, tense, and dark, a realization that the wood is the only thing between them and the crushing weight of the deep. This is a story of the sovereignty of the floating hearth, where they share a small lamp, and a story of the families they hope to save. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the sea is trying to wash away their names, just like the paint. The sound of the waves hitting the hull is a deep and constant thud, signaling that the true enemy is the depth that wants to swallow their resolve. The experience in the Indigo Sea ends with Gustave standing at the bow of the ship, looking toward the next region, the Golden Orchard. The blue of the water has led to a sovereignty of the distant shore. He carries the weight of the sunken cities and the silence of the tides. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of changing landscapes. The focus would now shift to the amber woods, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the autumn into a world of falling leaves, golden light, and the harvest of the years. The final legacy of the fourth part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the floating plank. You have seen the warriors walk through the mist and the waves to find the solid ground within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the salt and the weight of the deep. As the blue glow of the sea fades behind you and the first yellow leaves of the orchard appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the first step onto the land, leaving behind the fluid world for a world of gold, harvest, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. the journey leaves the vast, ink-colored horizon of the sea behind and steps onto the solid, warm earth of the Golden Orchard. This is a place where the Paintress has captured the very essence of a harvest that never ends, a forest where the trees are heavy with fruit and the leaves are the color of hammered gold. This part of the history is a story of the gilded cage, a realization that beauty can be just as stifling as the gray dust of Lumiere. The atmosphere here is rich, mellow, and hazy, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a thick carpet of amber leaves that crunch with a sound like breaking glass. The air tastes of honey, overripe apples, and the heavy, sweet scent of drying hay. The sound of the world is a low and constant rustle, as if the trees are whispering the names of everyone who ever ate from their branches. Gustave leads the team under the canopy, his armor catching the dappled light of a sun that seems stuck in a permanent late afternoon. Realizing that in the orchard, the danger is the desire to stay forever. As the team moves deeper into the groves, the atmosphere shifts to one of heavy abundance. They find trees whose fruit looks like jewels, ruby cherries, and emerald pears that glow with an inner light. This is the era of the forbidden taste, where the atmosphere is one of sensory overload and quiet temptation. You see the way the sunlight filters through the yellow leaves, turning the air into a golden fog that makes it hard to remember the cold peaks or the red desert. This part of the history is a story of the satiated soul, a realization that the Paintress is trying to bribe them with a paradise that costs them their mission. The sound of a falling apple hitting the ground is a deep and thudding note, a reminder that gravity still works in this world of art. Gustave moves with a sturdy and resolute might, his hand never straying far from his sword as the golden glow of the canopy tries to soften the hard edges of his resolve. Deep within the grove of the silent harvesters, the atmosphere becomes unnatural and still. The group finds figures standing among the trees, people who have been turned into wooden statues with skin like bark and hair like autumn leaves. This is the trial of the rooted life, where the atmosphere becomes one of stagnant beauty and biological horror. These were members of expeditions long ago who stopped to rest and never got back up. The sound of the wind through their wooden fingers is a high and mournful creak, making the grove feel like a living museum of apathy. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the orchard, they must keep the heart moving. He feels the warm humidity on the brow and the soft pull of the soil on his boots, a feeling of total and grounded vigilance. At the center of a clearing where the trees grow in a perfect circle, the group encounters the orchard keeper, a massive creature that looks like a stag made of woven branches and golden vines, its antlers dripping with a thick amber sap. The fight is a story of the steel against the growth. The atmosphere is violent, golden, and wild as the keeper stomps its hooves, causing thick roots to burst from the ground to entangle the team. This is the trial of the tangled path, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast movement and sharp cutting. Gustave must hack through the living wood, a realization that the orchard is a hungry thing that wants to add their bones to its soil. The sound of the creature's roar is a deep and wooden groan, making the air feel like it is vibrating with the strength of the forest. When the keeper finally falls and dissolves into a pile of autumn leaves, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and fragrant quiet, a realization that the land sees them as a blight on its perfection. Leaving the clearing, the journey leads to the edge of the Cider Falls, a place where a river of golden liquid pours over a cliff of white marble. The atmosphere is vast, roaring, and sweet, a realization that the Paintress has even turned the water into a luxury. This part of the history is a story of the liquid gold, where the atmosphere is one of heavy mist and drowning beauty. You see the way the spray from the falls coats everything in a sticky, sweet film that sparkles in the light. The air is thick and carries the taste of sugar and fermented fruit. The sound of the water hitting the rocks below is a thunderous and rhythmic beat, signaling that the pulse of the orchard is a powerful and intoxicating force. The walk through the path of the falling years is a story of the dropping leaf. You encounter areas where the leaves falling from the trees are inscribed with dates, the birthdays of those who were taken by the numbers. This is a moment of raw and natural grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the orchard is a harvest of time itself. This part of the history is a story of the golden record, where the team must walk through a blizzard of dates, seeing the years of their own lives fluttering past them. The sound of the leaves brushing against their armor is a soft and persistent whisper, making Gustave feel small and solid in a world that counts every second. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his eyes looking straight ahead to avoid reading the names on the ground. Deep in the heart of the forest camp, the final trial of the orchard takes place as the team sits around a small and smoke-filled fire. The atmosphere is intimate, heavy, and drowsy, a realization that the scent of the trees is trying to put them to sleep. This is a story of the sovereignty of the wakeful mind, where they pinch their own skin and splash their faces with cold water to stay alert. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the simple, bitter bread of Lumiere and how much they miss its honest gray walls. The sound of an owl hooting in the gold-leafed trees is a lonely and sharp note, signaling that the true enemy is the comfort that makes you forget the mission. The experience in the Golden Orchard ends with Gustave standing at the far exit of the woods, looking out over the next region, the violet marshes. The gold of the leaves has led to a sovereignty of the dark horizon. He carries the weight of the harvested years and the silence of the groves. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of decaying beauty. The focus would now shift to the sunken lands, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the shadows into a world of purple mist, glowing fungi, and the damp breath of the earth. The final legacy of the fifth part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the resolute step. You have seen the warriors walk through the gold and the honey to find the hunger within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the sweetness and the weight of the temptation. As the amber glow of the orchard fades behind you and the first purple mist of the marshes appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the departure from paradise, leaving behind the gilded forest for a world of rot, shadow, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey moves away from the golden warmth of the orchard and descends into the violet marshes, a low-lying expanse of soggy earth where the horizon is a permanent, bruised shade of purple. This is the place where the Paintress has allowed her colors to run together and rot, creating a world of stagnant pools, glowing fungi, and a thick, lavender-colored mist that never lifts. This part of the history is a story of the slow decay, a realization that even the most beautiful art eventually turns to sludge if it is left in the damp. The atmosphere here is cool, humid, and heavy, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a sponge-like moss that oozes a dark, neon violet liquid with every step. The air tastes of peat, wet stone, and the sharp, medicinal tang of spores. The sound of the world is a low and constant squelch, as if the earth itself is trying to pull the travelers down into the dark. Gustave leads the team across a series of half-sunken stone piers, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, realizing that in the marshes, the danger is not what you see, but what is hidden just beneath the surface. As the team pushes into the heart of the bogs, the atmosphere shifts to one of ominous glow. They find patches of massive, plate-sized mushrooms that pulse with a soft, rhythmic light, illuminating the underside of the mist. This is the era of the bioluminescent shadow, where the atmosphere is one of deep color and narrow vision. You see the way the purple light reflects off the ripples in the black water, creating the illusion of movement where there is only silence. This part of the history is a story of the false path, a realization that the glowing fungi are often a trap set by the marsh to lead the unwary into the deepest mud. The sound of a gas bubble rising and popping in the distance is a soft and hollow gloop, a reminder that the land is alive and hungry. Gustave moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes scanning the fog for the telltale signs of solid ground, realizing that to lose his footing here is to become part of the bog's memory. Deep within the garden of the fungal spires, the atmosphere becomes thick and choking. The group must wear wet cloths over their faces to filter out the clouds of spores that drift from the tall, tower-like mushrooms. This is the trial of the heavy breath, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical strain and muffled senses. The spores make the mind wander, bringing back the voices of those who were erased during the number 25. The sound of the spores hitting their metal helmets is a soft and constant patter, making the garden feel like a tomb made of velvet. This part of the history is a realization that the marsh attacks the mind before it attacks the body. He feels the damp chill on the back of the neck and the steady weight of the mud on his boots, a feeling of total and grounded resistance. At the edge of a wide, black lake, the group encounters a sporewalker, a creature that looks like a massive, skeletal crane made of petrified wood and dripping with long, purple fungal beards. The fight is a story of the steel against the infection. The atmosphere is violent, misty, and dim as the creature swings its spindly legs, kicking up clouds of toxic dust and splashing the team with acidic water. This is the trial of the shifting surface, where the atmosphere becomes one of unsteady footing and high stakes. Gustav must use the surrounding stone ruins for cover, a realization that the creature is much faster in the mud than he is. The sound of the creature's screech is a high and raspy hiss, making the air feel like it is filled with the dust of 1,000 years. When the walker finally collapses and sinks into the black water, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and damp stillness, a realization that the marsh is a graveyard that is always looking for new residents. Leaving the lake, the journey leads to the edge of the Whispering Reeds, a field of tall, purple grass that grows 10 feet high and rattles in the wind. The atmosphere is vast, hidden, and noisy, a realization that the Paintress has used the grass to hide the paths of those who came before. This part of the history is a story of the lost trail, where the atmosphere is one of constant movement and hidden eyes. You see the way the reeds bend and sway even when there is no breeze, as if things are moving just out of sight. The air is cool and carries the taste of salt and decaying moss. The sound of the grass rubbing together is a high and grating whisper, signaling that the song of the marsh is a warning to stay on the path. The walk through the tunnel of the hanging vines is a story of the tangled past. You encounter old banners and shields from the 20th expedition, draped in moss and hanging from the branches of the weeping trees. This is a moment of raw and historical sadness. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the marsh is the final resting place for many who thought they could reach the tower. This part of the history is a story of the rusted shield, where the team must move carefully to avoid tripping over the bones of those who were trapped by the vines. The sound of their boots on the wet roots is a dull and respectful thud, making Gustav feel small and solid in a world that consumes everything. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand cutting away the vines to keep the path clear for his team. Deep in the heart of the marsh camp, the final trial of the Violet Bogs takes place as the team huddles together on a small and tilted stone platform. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and damp, a realization that the water is slowly rising around them. This is a story of the sovereignty of the dry spark, where they struggle to keep a small lantern lit against the heavy mist. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the stone floors of Lumiere and how they never appreciated the feeling of dry feet. The sound of a marsh predator howling in the distance is a lonely and deep note, signaling that the true enemy is the slow, wet cold that saps the will to move. The experience in the violet marshes ends with Gustave standing at the far edge of the reeds, looking toward the next region, the obsidian cliffs. The purple of the mist has led to a sovereignty of the black wall. He carries the weight of the 20th shield and the silence of the bogs. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of rising stone. The focus would now shift to the dark heights, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the vertical into a world of sharp glass, howling winds, and the jagged edges of the earth. The final legacy of the 6th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the upward look. You have seen the warriors walk through the mud and the spores to find the oxygen within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the acid and the weight of the decay. As the purple glow of the marsh fades behind you and the first black shadows of the cliffs appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the escape from the mud, leaving behind the sinking world for a world of stone, height, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the sinking weight of the marshes behind and begins the vertical ascent of the obsidian cliffs, a wall of volcanic glass that rises from the mud like a jagged black tooth. This is a place where the Paintress has used a sharp and violent stroke, creating a landscape that is as beautiful as it is lethal, where every edge is a razor and the wind carries the sound of shattering crystal. This part of the history is a story of the vertical climb, a realization that to reach the heart of the world, the expedition must leave the horizontal earth and become creatures of the air. The atmosphere here is sharp, cold, and thin, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a polished surface of black glass that reflects the bruised purple of the sky below. The air tastes of sulfur, cold stone, and the metallic tang of blood from fingers cut by the rock. The sound of the world is a high and constant shriek as the gale force winds tear through the obsidian spires, making the entire cliffside feel like a colossal black mirror that is trying to shake off the tiny figures clinging to its face. Gustave leads the climb, his fingers wrapped in thick leather to protect them from the glass, realizing that on the cliffs, gravity is the only law that cannot be ignored. As the team pulls themselves higher, the atmosphere shifts to one of dizzying exposure. The violet mists of the marshes fall away into a distant, hazy floor, leaving the expedition suspended over a void that seems to have no end. You see the way the obsidian catches the light, casting sharp, dark glints that look like eyes watching from the stone. This is the era of the narrow grip, where the atmosphere is one of high stakes and absolute vertigo. This part of the history is a story of the weight of the body, a realization that every ounce of gear and every muscle in the legs must be accounted for. The sound of a falling stone hitting the glass below is a sharp and sizzling ping, a reminder that there is no safety net for those who slip. Gustave moves with a sturdy and rhythmic might, his boots finding the smallest cracks in the glass as the searing wind of the heights tries to peel him away from the wall. Deep within the gallery of the glass chimneys, the atmosphere becomes confined and echoing. The group must navigate through narrow vertical tunnels where the walls are so smooth they offer no handholds, forcing the warriors to wedge their bodies against the stone to move upward. This is the trial of the internal pressure, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical exhaustion and muffled panic. The darkness of the tunnels is absolute, broken only by the sparks kicked up by their metal armor against the volcanic glass. The sound of their own heavy breathing is amplified into a thunderous and rhythmic echo, making the chimneys feel like the inside of a stone throat. This part of the history is a realization that to conquer the heights, they must trust the strength of the bone over the sight of the eyes. He feels the raw ache in the forearms and the steady burn in the chest, a feeling of total and grounded persistence at the edge of a wide, flat ledge that juts out over the abyss. The group encounters an obsidian harrier, a winged guardian made of overlapping plates of black glass and silk-like canvas that screams with the sound of grinding metal. The fight is a story of the steel against the wind. The atmosphere is violent, high, and cold as the creature dives from the clouds, its glass wings cutting through the air like scythes. This is the trial of the open sky, where the atmosphere becomes one of precise timing and desperate defense. Gustave must time his strikes perfectly, catching the creature as it passes, a realization that on a narrow ledge, there is no room for a missed step. The sound of the harrier's shriek is a high and piercing wail, making the air feel like it is filled with the shards of the sky. When the creature finally shatters into 1,000 black fragments that fall into the void, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and windy stillness, a realization that the heights are guarded by the very wind itself. Leaving the ledge, the journey leads to the entrance of the echoing vault, a natural cathedral carved into the side of the peak, where the wind plays a constant, mournful song. The atmosphere is vast, hollow, and resonant, a realization that the Paintress has used the cliffs to create a monument to the sounds of the world. This part of the history is a story of the music of the stone, where the atmosphere is one of deep vibration and ancient sorrow. You see the way the obsidian walls are etched with the patterns of the wind, looking like the grooves of a giant record. The air is thin and carries the taste of salt and cold iron. The sound of their footsteps on the glass floor is a sharp and ringing note, signaling that the vault of the air is a place where every noise is a memory. The walk through the path of the shattered years is a story of the falling stone. You encounter areas where the path is littered with the broken tools and rusted grappling hooks of the 15th expedition, who were lost to the wind a century ago. This is a moment of raw and vertical grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the cliffs are a ladder made of the broken dreams of those who came before. This part of the history is a story of the gravity of the past, where the team must step over the empty helmets of their ancestors, realizing that the mountain does not care about the numbers. The sound of their gear clanking against the stone is a hollow and respectful beat, making Gustave feel small and solid in a world that is mostly empty space. He moves with a sturdy and balanced grace, his hand checking the knots of the rope that connects him to his team. Deep in the heart of the cliffside camp, the final trial of the Obsidian Heights takes place as the team huddles together in a shallow and windy niche. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and tense, a realization that the ledge is barely wide enough for them to sit. This is a story of the sovereignty of the tether, where they sleep with their arms linked, knowing that a single restless movement could send someone into the dark. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the flat, dusty plains of the start of the journey and how they miss the simple weight of the earth beneath them. The sound of the wind howling through the glass spires is a lonely and deep note, signaling that the true enemy is the distance that separates them from the ground. The experience on the Obsidian Cliffs ends with Gustave standing at the very top of the highest spire, looking toward the next region, the white wasteland. The black of the glass has led to a sovereignty of the blank canvas. He carries the weight of the 15th rope and the silence of the heights. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of fatting detail. The focus would now shift to the endless white, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the absence into a world of snow, light, and the disappearance of all color. The final legacy of the 7th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the vertical reach. You have seen the warriors walk through the glass and the wind to find the anchor within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the cold and the weight of the abyss. As the black glint of the cliffs fades behind you and the first blinding white of the wasteland appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the arrival at the summit, leaving behind the sharp world for a world of soft snow, blinding light, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the sharp, black edges of the glass cliffs behind and enters the white wasteland, a world of absolute absence where the paintress has stopped using color altogether. This is a landscape that feels unfinished, a vast and blinding expanse of white snow and white sky where the horizon has vanished, and there is no difference between the earth and the air. This part of the history is a story of the blank canvas, a realization that the most terrifying thing a god can do is stop creating. The atmosphere here is silent, cold, and blinding, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a deep, powdery drift of white ash that swallows all sound. The The air tastes of ice, clean ozone, and the strange, neutral scent of nothingness. The sound of the world is a low and constant muffle, as if the entire universe has been wrapped in cotton, making the expedition feel like they are walking through a dream that is waiting to wake up. Gustave leads the team into the white, his eyes narrowed against the glare, realizing that in the wasteland, the danger is the loss of one's own sense of self. As the team pushes into the void, the atmosphere shifts to one of sensory deprivation. Without trees, rocks, or shadows to guide them, the warriors begin to feel the weight of the white space. You see the way they walk in a tight circle, each person keeping their hand on the shoulder of the one in front, a realization that to drift a few feet away is to disappear forever into the blankness. This is the era of the missing horizon, where the atmosphere is one of internal focus and growing vertigo. This part of the history is a story of the invisible path, a realization that the only way to move forward is to trust the compass of the heart. The sound of their own heartbeats becomes a thunderous and rhythmic thump in the silence, a reminder that they are still alive in a world that looks dead. Gustave moves with a steady and measured power, his boots sinking deep into the white drifts as the blinding light of the absence tries to wash away the details of his face. Deep within the field of the still frames, the atmosphere becomes static and strange. The group finds objects from previous expeditions, a wagon, a tent, a pile of crates that have been frozen in time and stripped of all color. They look like sketches made of charcoal on a white page, flat and two-dimensional, until you touch them. This is the trial of the flat world, where the atmosphere becomes one of visual confusion and cognitive strain. The warriors find it hard to tell how far away things are, a realization that the Paintress has removed the depth from the world. The sound of their voices is flat and thin, making the field feel like a page in an empty book. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the wasteland, they must feel the dimensions with their hands. He feels the numbing cold on the fingertips and the steady pressure of the gaze, a feeling of total and grounded concentration. At the center of a perfectly circular depression in the snow, the group encounters the colorless wraith, a creature made of transparent silk and shifting wind that is almost invisible against the white background. The fight is a story of the steel against the void. The atmosphere is violent, muted, and ethereal. As the creature moves without making a sound, its presence only known by the way it distorts the light like a ripple in water. This is the trial of the unseen enemy, where the atmosphere becomes one of primal instinct and sudden impacts. Gustave must listen for the displacement of the air, a realization that the eyes are useless in a world without shadows. The sound of the wraith's movement is a soft and rushing whistle, making the air feel like it is filled with the ghost of a breeze. When the creature finally dissipates into a cloud of white steam, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and blinding calm, a realization that the wasteland does not want to be disturbed, leaving the depression the journey leads to the edge of the echoing basin, a place where the sound of the wind is amplified by the curve of the white hills. The atmosphere is vast, roaring, and hollow, a realization that the Paintress has left the sound of the world behind even as she took away the sight. This part of the history is a story of the sound of the empty, where the atmosphere is one of aural overload and physical vibration. You see the way the snow ripples in patterns created by the noise, looking like the surface of a white sea. The air is thin and carries the taste of salt and frozen dust. The sound of their own shouts echoing back is a sharp and distorted note, signaling that the basin of the air is a place where every word is a permanent mark on the silence. The walk through the path of the erased names is a story of the final silence. You encounter areas where the snow has been blown away to reveal the white stone beneath, etched with the names of the 10th expedition who were erased during the very first years of the Paintress's reign. This is a moment of raw and ancient grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the wasteland is the beginning and the end of the world's color. This part of the history is a story of the white grave, where the team must walk over the names of those who were forgotten before they were even born. The sound of their boots on the stone is a sharp and respectful click, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is fading away. He moves with a sturdy and balanced grace, his hand never leaving the rope that connects him to the living. Deep in the heart of the wasteland camp, the final trial of the White Void takes place as the team huddles together in a tent of thin canvas. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and muffled, a realization that the white outside is trying to seep into their minds. This is a story of the sovereignty of the inner color, where they take turns describing the colors. They remember the green of the grass, the red of the desert, the blue of the sea, to keep the memory of the world alive. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that they are the only pigment left in this part of the world. The sound of the snow hitting the tent is a soft and constant hiss, signaling that the true enemy is the forgetting that comes with the blankness. The experience in the white wasteland ends with Gustave standing at the far edge of the void, looking toward the next region, the Iron Forest. The white of the snow has led to a sovereignty of the dark spires. He carries the weight of the 10th's memory and the silence of the absence. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of returning form. The focus would now shift to the metal woods, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the industry into a world of rusted steel, grinding gears, and the hard edges of the machine. The final legacy of the 8th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the visible breath. You have seen the warriors walk through the blankness and the silence to find the detail within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the glare and the weight of the void. As the white glow of the wasteland fades behind you, and the first dark silhouettes of the iron trees appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the return of the shadow, leaving behind the empty world for a world of metal, sound, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the blinding silence of the white void behind and enters the iron forest, a place where the paintress has traded her brushes for the heavy, grinding tools of a world made of metal. This is a landscape of rusted steel trunks and jagged iron leaves that rattle in the wind with the sound of 1,000 knives. This part of the history is a story of the cold industry, a realization that the world can be built of things that do not breathe or grow, but only endure. The atmosphere here is hard, heavy, and smoggy, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a floor of iron plating and oily gravel that smells of old grease and burnt copper. The air tastes of rust, coal smoke, and the sharp, acidic tang of battery fluid. The sound of the world is a constant and low grinding, as if a massive machine is turning deep underground, making the entire forest feel like a colossal, rusted clock that is slowly running out of time. Gustave leads the team through the narrow aisles of metal trees, his armor clanking against the steel branches, realizing that in the iron woods, the danger is the rigidity of the heart. As the team pushes into the heart of the machinery, the atmosphere shifts to one of rhythmic compression. They find trees that are actually vertical pistons, moving up and down with a slow, crushing force that shakes the earth. You see the way the black oil drips from the iron leaves, staining the ground and making the path as slick as ice. This is the era of the mechanical pulse, where the atmosphere is one of heavy vibration and industrial noise. This part of the history is a story of the unending gear, a realization that the Paintress has created a forest that never sleeps and never dies, but only continues to grind. The sound of the steam escaping from the pipes is a high and piercing hiss, a reminder that the pressure in this world is always rising. Gustave moves with a sturdy and balanced might, his boots gripping the rusted plates as the orange glow of the furnaces flickers through the metal canopy, casting long mechanical shadows that look like bars on a cage. Deep within the forge of the broken parts, the atmosphere becomes hot and suffocating. The group must navigate through a series of giant, rotating gears that serve as the only bridge over a pit of molten lead. This is the trial of the perfect timing, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical danger and constant motion. The heat from the pit below turns their sweat into steam inside their armor, a realization that the forest is trying to melt them into its own design. The sound of the metal grinding on metal is a deep and bone-shaking roar, making the forge feel like the inside of a giant's engine. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the iron, they must become as hard as the steel while keeping the flexibility of the spirit. He feels the searing heat on the palms and the steady hammering of the air against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded resilience. At the center of a clearing, Filled with piles of rusted scrap, the group encounters the Iron Sentinel, a massive guardian made of interlocking plates, swinging a heavy flail made of crane cables and wrecking balls. The fight is a story of the blade against the hammer. The atmosphere is violent, loud, and sparks-filled as the Sentinel slams its weapons into the iron floor, sending shocks of vibration through the team's legs. This is the trial of the unyielding wall, where the atmosphere becomes one of forceful impacts and desperate maneuvering. Gustave must find the exposed pistons in the creature's joints, a realization that even the strongest machine has a point of failure. The sound of the Sentinel's movement is a harsh and grating clatter, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of a mountain. When the Sentinel finally breaks apart into a heap of dead metal, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and oily stillness, a realization that the forest is a place that respects only strength. Leaving the clearing, the journey leads to the edge of the Gearworks Bridge, a structure made of thousands of moving parts that constantly shift and rearrange themselves. The atmosphere is vast, complex, and dizzying, a realization that the Paintress has used the forest to build a bridge that is a puzzle of logic and physics. This part of the history is a story of the mathematical path, where the atmosphere is one of calculated risk and moving earth. You see the way the bridge unfolds and retracts with a precision that makes the warriors feel like tiny insects on a clock face. The air is thick and carries the taste of smoke and hot oil. The sound of the gears locking into place is a deep and final clack, signaling that the bridge of the machine is a place where there is no room for a single error. The walk through the path of the rusted echoes is a story of the fatting work. You encounter areas where the iron trees have started to crumble into red dust, showing the hollow skeletons of what was once a great industrial design. This is a moment of raw and metallic grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that even a world of iron eventually succumbs to the rot of the years. This part of the history is a story of the Red Rain, where the team must walk through a shower of rust flakes that fall like dry leaves. The sound of their boots on the hollow metal pipes is a sharp and ringing thud, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is slowly falling apart. He moves with a sturdy and careful power, his hand checking the integrity of the iron path ahead of his team. Deep in the heart of the forest camp, the final trial of the iron woods takes place as the team huddles together inside a large and rusted pipe. The atmosphere is intimate, dark, and cold, a realization that the forest has no heart to give them warmth. This is a story of the sovereignty of the living heat, where they sit close together, their body warmth being the only thing that keeps the freezing metal from stealing their breath. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the wooden houses of Lumiere and the feeling of soft grass against the skin. The sound of the wind whistling through the hollow trees is a lonely and metallic note, signaling that the true enemy is the cold indifference of the machine. The experience in the iron forest ends with Gustave standing at the far exit of the pipes, looking toward the next region, the marble plains. The rust of the metal has led to a sovereignty of the white stone. He carries the weight of the gearworks lesson and the silence of the industry. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of emerging perfection. The focus would now shift to the polished fields, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the sculpture into a world of white marble, carved statues, and the stillness of the stone. The final legacy of the ninth part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the unbroken gear. You have seen the warriors walk through the rust and the fire to find the movement within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the machine. As the orange glow of the forest fades behind you and the first white pillars of the plains appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the emergence from the smoke, leaving behind the industrial world for a world of stone, art, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the grinding gears and oily smoke of the iron forest behind, stepping into the breathtaking and terrifying stillness of the marble plains. This is a region where the paintress has discarded the messy tools of industry to return to the elegance of the chisel, creating a landscape of pristine white stone that stretches toward the horizon like a frozen sea. This part of the history is a story of the silent perfection, a realization that the world can be carved into a shape that never ages and never changes, but also never breathes. The atmosphere here is bright, cold, and absolute, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a floor of polished marble that is so smooth it reflects the pale sun like a mirror. The air tastes of limestone dust, cold water, and the dry mineral scent of a mountain that has been turned inside out. The sound of the world is a sharp and echoing silence, as every footstep on the stone rings out with a clarity that makes the travelers feel like they are walking through the center of a hollow bell. Gustave leads the team across the white expanse, his eyes fixed on the distant columns that rise like giants from the earth, realizing that in the marble plains, the danger is the stillness that wants to claim your own pulse. As the team moves across the open stone, the atmosphere shifts to one of ghostly observation. They begin to pass through fields of statues, thousands of figures carved from the same white stone as the ground, their faces frozen in expressions of joy, terror, or mundane thought. This is the era of the sculpted breath, where the atmosphere is one of artistic perfection and deep unease. You see the way the light catches the detail of the stone, the delicate folds of a dress, the strain of a muscle, the moisture in an eyeball rendered with a skill that feels more like a curse than a gift. This part of the history is a story of the stone mirror, a realization that these are not just statues. But the people who were taken when the number 40 was painted, their very souls trapped in a layer of marble. The sound of the wind whistling between the figures is a high and mournful note, a reminder that the world is a museum of what used to be. Gustave moves with a sturdy and resolute might, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword as the white glare of the stone tries to blind him to the movement of the shadows. Deep within the gallery of the unfinished, the atmosphere becomes heavy and expectant. The group finds half-carved blocks of stone where the bodies are still emerging from the rock, some with only a hand or a screaming face visible through the marble. This is the trial of the growing form, where the atmosphere becomes one of biological stasis and visual horror. The expedition must walk through a maze of these emerging figures, a realization that the paintress is still working, still refining her vision of a perfect, silent world. The sound of their own footsteps is amplified into a thunderous and rhythmic beat, making the gallery feel like the inside of a giant's workshop. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the marble, they must remain fluid in a world that wants to harden. He feels the dry heat on the skin and the steady ache in the eyes from the white reflection, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the base of a massive archway held up by two stone giants, the group encounters the marble warden, a creature that looks like a beautiful, multi-armed dancer made of seamless white stone, wielding blades that are as thin and sharp as a surgeon's tool. The fight is a story of the steel against the statue. The atmosphere is violent, elegant, and fast, as the warden moves with a grace that defies the weight of its stone body, its blades ringing against Gustave's shield with a sound like a tuning fork. This is the trial of the perfect strike, where the atmosphere becomes one of high precision and lethal beauty. Gustave must find the invisible seams where the stone was joined, a realization that even perfection has a flaw if you know where to look. The sound of the warden's movement is a soft and grinding slither, making the air feel like it is filled with the dust of 1,000 masterpieces. When the warden finally shatters into a pile of white rubble, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and still calm, a realization that the plains do not tolerate anything that moves. Leaving the battlefield, the journey leads to the edge of the reflection pool, a vast lake of water so still it looks like a sheet of dark glass. The atmosphere is vast, quiet, and deep, a realization that the paintress has created a mirror to look at her own work. This part of the history is a story of the liquid mirror, where the atmosphere is one of symmetry and deep thought. You see the way the white columns of the plains are reflected perfectly in the water, creating a world that exists both above and below the surface. The air is cool and carries the taste of rain and ancient dust. The sound of a single drop of water falling into the pool is a deep and resonant note, signaling that the heart of the plains is a place of absolute and terrifying clarity. The walk through the path of the final pose is a story of the fatting human, you encounter statues that have begun to erode, their features softening into smooth, featureless shapes that look like pebbles in a river. This is a moment of raw and artistic grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that even marble eventually loses the memory of the person it used to be. This part of the history is a story of the smooth face, where the team must walk past the ghosts of their history, seeing the figures of the fifth expedition slowly turning back into simple stone. The sound of their boots on the marble floor is a sharp and respectful click, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is losing its detail. He moves with a sturdy and balanced grace, his hand never straying far from the person next to him, terrified that the stillness might be contagious. Deep in the heart of the marble camp, the final trial of the White Plains takes place as the team huddles together in a circle of cold stone. The atmosphere is intimate, bright, and exhausted, a realization that the open space offers no protection and no privacy. This is a story of the sovereignty of the imperfect, where they talk about the scars on their bodies and the dirt under their fingernails, anything to remind themselves that they are not made of stone. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the Paintress's version of perfection is a world without a heart. The sound of the wind howling across the flat marble is a lonely and sharp note, signaling that the true enemy is the beauty that makes you want to stop fighting. The experience in the marble plains ends with Gustave standing at the very edge of the stone fields, looking toward the next region, the ashen lowlands. The white of the marble has led to a sovereignty of the gray dust. He carries the weight of the warden's blade and the silence of the statues. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of increasing desolation. The focus would now shift to the fields of gray, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the cinder into a world of falling ash, scorched earth, and the remnants of the Paintress's failed experiments. The final legacy of the 10th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the flaw. You have seen the warriors walk through the perfection and the stone to find the warmth within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the light and the weight of the silence. As the white glow of the marble fades behind you and the first gray clouds of ash appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the departure from the gallery, leaving behind the sculpted world for a world of ash, fire, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the cold, crystalline perfection of the marble behind and descends into the ashen lowlands, a desolate expanse where the sky is a heavy, bruised gray, and the ground is buried under a foot of soft, silver soot. This is the place where the Paintress discards her mistakes, a wasteland of failed sketches and scorched ideas that have been burned down to their most basic elements. This part of the history is a story of the final residue, a realization that even a god has a scrap heap. The The atmosphere here is warm, muffled, and gritty, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a deceptive surface of charcoal and cinder that collapses with every step. The air tastes of burnt cedar, sulfur, and the dry, alkaline sting of wood ash. The sound of the world is a low and hollow thud as the heavy soot swallows the noise of their movement, making the entire region feel like a colossal, smoldering hearth that is slowly cooling into the dark. Gustave leads the team through the gray fog, his cloak covered in a layer of fine dust, realizing that in the lowlands, the danger is the slow suffocation of the spirit under the weight of what has been discarded. As the team moves deeper into the fields of gray, the atmosphere shifts to one of cindered memory. They find the remains of buildings and objects that look like they were made of paper and then set on fire, their charred skeletons standing as fragile monuments to a world that was never finished. You see the way the ash falls from the sky in slow, heavy flakes, looking like gray snow that never melts. This is the era of the smoldering remnant, where the atmosphere is one of muted light and ghostly heat. This part of the history is a story of the burnt page, a realization that these ruins are the drafts of cities that the Paintress decided weren't good enough to exist. The sound of the wind through the scorched beams is a soft and whistling sigh, a sign that the land is still breathing out the heat of its destruction. Gustave moves with a sturdy and careful might, his boots kicking up clouds of silver dust that hang in the air like a shroud, realizing that here, the history of the world is being turned into dust. Deep within the forest of charred ribs, the atmosphere becomes confined and brittle. The trees here are nothing more than blackened stalks of carbon, their branches snapping with the slightest touch. This is the trial of the fragile path, where the atmosphere becomes one of delicate movement and constant awareness. The group must navigate through the maze of burnt timber without causing a collapse, a realization that the world is literally falling apart around them. The sound of their own armor brushing against the charcoal is a sharp and grating hiss, making the forest feel like the inside of a dead fire. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the ash, they must move like a shadow through the wreckage. He feels the dry heat on the throat and the steady grit in the eyes, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the center of a wide, circular pit filled with glowing embers, the group encounters an ash shade, a creature made of swirling soot and red-hot coals that has no solid form, moving like a cloud of smoke that bites. The fight is a story of the steel against the heat. The atmosphere is violent, hazy, and searing as the shade lashes out with whips of living fire, turning the gray air into a blur of orange sparks. This is the trial of the shifting target, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast reflexes and heat management. Gustave must use his blade to dissipate the creature's core, a realization that even smoke has a heart if you strike fast enough. The sound of the shade's movement is a low and constant roar, making the air feel like it is filled with the breath of a furnace. When the shade finally collapses into a pile of cold soot, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and muffled stillness, a realization that the lowlands are a place where life is a brief and burning thing. Leaving the pit, the journey leads to the edge of the Cinder Lake, a vast depression filled with gray dust that behaves like water, rippling in the wind and swallowing anything that tries to float. The atmosphere is vast, flat, and silent, a realization that the Paintress has used the ash to create a sea that provides no life. This part of the history is a story of the dust tide, where the atmosphere is one of surface tension and deep shadows. You see the way the scorched ruins of old ships sit half submerged in the gray, their wooden hulls long since turned to charcoal. The air is thick and carries the taste of smoke and bitter chemicals. The sound of the ash shifting against the shore is a soft and grating rustle, signaling that the sea of cinders is a place where every step could be a descent into the dark. The walk through the path of the scorched names is a story of the final erasure. You encounter areas where the ash has been blown away to reveal the blackened foundations of the 5th expedition's final camp. This is a moment of raw and final grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the lowlands are the place where the Paintress throws the things she no longer wants to see. This part of the history is a story of the Silver Grave, where the team must walk past the rusted remains of gear and the white bones of those who were caught in the final burn. The sound of their boots on the scorched earth is a dull and respectful thud, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is losing its weight. He moves with a sturdy and balanced grace, his hand checking the seal of his mask to keep the history of the dead out of his lungs. Deep in the heart of the lowland camp, the final trial of the ash takes place as the team huddles together inside a hollowed-out, burnt shell of a house. The atmosphere is intimate, dark, and gritty, a realization that the gray dust is getting into everything they own. This is a story of the sovereignty of the clean breath, where they share a small filter and talk about the smell of the rain in Lumiere. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the Paintress's failures are more human than her perfections. The sound of the ash falling on the roof is a soft and constant pitter-patter, signaling that the true enemy is the slow burial of their purpose under the weight of the discarded past. The experience in the ashen lowlands ends with Gustave standing at the far edge of the gray fields, looking toward the next region, the Copper Canyons. The gray of the ash has led to a sovereignty of the metallic red. He carries the weight of the shade's ember and the silence of the lowlands. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of raw ore. The focus would now shift to the vertical red walls, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the vein into a world of hard metal, sharp echoes, and the resonance of the earth. The final legacy of the 11th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the unburned heart, You have seen the warriors walk through the soot and the fire to find the oxygen within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the dust and the weight of the failures. As the gray fog of the lowlands fades behind you and the first red walls of the canyons appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the rise from the cinders, leaving behind the discarded world for a world of stone, metal, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey moves away from the soft, stifling dust of the lowlands and enters the copper canyons, a world of massive, vertical walls that glow with the deep, metallic red of raw ore. This is a place where the Paintress has carved her world out of the very foundation of the earth, creating a landscape that resonates with every sound and vibrates with a hidden energy. This part of the history is a story of the deep resonance, a realization that the mountains are not just stone, but a complex network of metal veins that carry the heartbeat of the land. The atmosphere here is warm, metallic, and echoing, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a hard surface of polished copper and dark basalt that rings like a bell with every step. The air tastes of penny copper, hot stone, and the sharp, dry scent of static electricity. The sound of the world is a constant and low hum, as if the entire canyon is a giant tuning fork that has been struck by a god, making the expedition feel like they are walking through the inside of a great clock. Gustave leads the team into the narrow shadows of the red walls, his hand feeling the warmth radiating from the metal, realizing that in the canyons, the danger is the sound that can shatter the bone. As the team pushes into the heart of the trenches, the atmosphere shifts to one of vibrational intensity. They find walls that are covered in natural geometric patterns, looking like the circuitry of a machine that was grown rather than built. You see the way the light reflects off the copper faces, turning the shadows into a deep, bloody orange that makes it hard to distinguish the stone from the flesh. This is the era of the singing earth, where the atmosphere is one of resonant frequency and constant pressure. This part of the history is a story of the living vein, a realization that the Paintress has used the metal to record the vibrations of every number she has ever painted. The sound of the wind through the high crevices is a low and haunting chord, a sign that the canyon is playing a song for the dead. Gustave moves with a sturdy and rhythmic might, his boots striking the ground in time with the earth's hum as the copper glow of the ravines tries to vibrate the thoughts right out of his head. Deep within the gallery of the echoing chambers, the atmosphere becomes overwhelming and loud. The group must cross a series of metal bridges that are suspended over a bottomless pit, where the sound of their movement is amplified 1,000 times by the shape of the stone. This is the trial of the perfect silence, where the atmosphere becomes one of extreme caution and muffled breath. Every clank of their armor or scrape of a boot sends a shockwave through the air that threatens to shake the bridges apart. The sound of their own voices is a distorted and booming roar making the chambers feel like the inside of a colossal bell. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the copper, they must move like the air across the metal. He feels the vibration in the teeth and the steady ache in the ears, a feeling of total and grounded concentration. At the center of a wide, flat plaza made of pure bronze, the group encounters a copper golem, a creature made of interlocking gears and smooth metal plates that hums with a blue electrical light. The fight is a story of the steel against the current. The atmosphere is violent, electric, and resonant. As the golem strikes the bronze floor with its fists, sending waves of sonic energy that knock the team off their feet. This is the trial of the harmonized strike, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast reflexes and rhythmic combat. Gustav must use his blade to disrupt the electrical flow in the creature's limbs, a realization that even the strongest metal can be softened by the right frequency. The sound of the golem's movement is a deep and grinding thrum, making the air feel like it is vibrating with the force of a storm. When the golem finally locks up and turns into a silent statue, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and metallic calm, a realization that the canyons are a place where only the strongest vibrations survive. Leaving the plaza, the journey leads to the edge of the Whispering Veins, a section of the canyon where the walls are so thin they act like the strings of a harp. The atmosphere is vast, fragile, and musical, a realization that the Paintress has used the metal to capture the voices of the wind. This part of the history is a story of the song of the earth, where the atmosphere is one of melodic grief and high tension. You see the way the copper wires stretch across the gaps, vibrating in the breeze to create a sound that is both beautiful and terrifying. The air is warm and carries the taste of hot metal and dry sand. The sound of the wind through the wires is a high and piercing note, signaling that the strings of the world are a place where the music never stops. The walk through the path of the resonant memory is a story of the echoing word. You encounter areas where the walls have recorded the final shouts of the 8th expedition, their voices trapped in the metal like a record. This is a moment of raw and auditory grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the canyons are a place where nothing is ever truly forgotten as long as the stone stands. This part of the history is a story of the bronze record, where the team must walk past the ghosts of their mission, hearing the names of the fallen being whispered by the walls. The sound of their boots on the bronze floor is a sharp and respectful click, making Gustav feel solid and heavy in a world that is made of sound. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand touching the warm walls to steady his mind against the voices. Deep in the heart of the canyon camp, the final trial of the copper walls takes place as the team huddles together inside a large and circular basin. The atmosphere is intimate, warm, and vibrating, a realization that they cannot escape the hum of the earth even when they sleep. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared rhythm, where they breathe in unison to stay calm against the constant noise. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the soft, quiet pillows of Lumiere and how they miss the silence of the snow. The sound of a metal shrike screaming in the distance is a sharp and piercing note, signaling that the true enemy is the resonance that tries to pull their bodies apart. The experience in the Copper Canyons ends with Gustav standing at the far exit of the trenches, looking toward the next region, the Cobalt Labyrinth. The red of the copper has led to a sovereignty of the cold blue. He carries the weight of the golem's spark and the silence of the ravines. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of complex geometry. The focus would now shift to the blue walls, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the maze into a world of puzzles, reflections, and the weight of the logic. The final legacy of the 12th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the harmonized spirit. You have seen the warriors walk through the metal and the sound to find the rhythm within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the static and the weight of the echo. As the red glow of the canyons fades behind you and the first blue walls of the labyrinth appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the exit from the sound, leaving behind the metallic world for a world of puzzles, blue light, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the resonant, metallic heat of the canyons behind and enters the Cobalt Labyrinth, a world of deep, sapphire-colored walls that shift and slide with the silent logic of a giant puzzle. This is the place where the Paintress has tested the geometry of the soul, creating a landscape where the straight line is a lie, and every corner leads back to a version of yourself you didn't want to see. This part of the history is a story of the blue confusion, a realization that the shortest distance between 2 points is often a curve that breaks the mind. The atmosphere here is cool, still, and deceptive, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a floor of smooth, cobalt stone that feels as hard as diamond and as cold as deep-sea ice. The air tastes of mint, old glass, and the sharp, chemical scent of blue ink. The sound of the world is a low and hollow click as the massive walls move on hidden tracks, making the entire labyrinth feel like a colossal blue machine that is constantly rewriting its own blueprint. Gustav leads the team into the first corridor, his hand tracing the cold stone, realizing that in the cobalt maze, the danger is the logic that circles back on itself until you forget why you started. As the team pushes deeper into the shifting lanes, the atmosphere shifts to one of optical distortion. They find walls made of polished cobalt that act as dark mirrors, reflecting the expedition back to themselves, but with eyes that look older and tired. You see the way the light refracts through the blue stone, turning the shadows into a deep electric indigo that makes the corridors feel like they are underwater. This is the era of the fractured vision, where the atmosphere is one of symmetry and hidden meanings. This part of the history is a story of the blue mirage, a realization that the Paintress has used the labyrinth to hide the path from anyone who doesn't know how to look at the world sideways. The sound of their own footsteps is muffled by the stone, creating a soft and delayed echo that makes it feel like someone is walking just a few seconds behind them. Gustave moves with a sturdy and careful might, his eyes fixed on the ceiling where the stars of the Paintress's sky provide a fixed point in a world that refuses to stand still. Deep within the Hall of the Infinite Returns, the atmosphere becomes claustrophobic and repetitive. The group finds themselves walking past the same blue statue of a weeping woman 3 times, realizing that the labyrinth is folding the space around them. This is the trial of the geometric spirit, where the atmosphere becomes one of mental strain and quiet panic. The warriors find that the marks they leave on the walls, scratches from their blades, or splashes of water, vanish the moment they turn their backs. A realization that the maze is healing its own secrets. The sound of the walls sliding into place is a deep and final thud, making the hall feel like the inside of a locked box. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the blue, they must trust the instinct of the blood over the map of the mind. He feels the cold dampness on the palms and the steady pressure in the temples, a feeling of total and grounded determination. At the center of a wide, triangular courtyard where the walls are made of translucent blue glass, the group encounters the Cobalt Weaver, a creature made of thin, sapphire wires and shards of mirror that moves with a blurring, staccato speed. The fight is a story of the steel against the reflection. The atmosphere is violent, blue, and sharp, as the Weaver creates illusions of itself, surrounding the team with a dozen versions of the same threat. This is the trial of the singular focus, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast reflexes and mental clarity. Gustave must ignore the mirrors and strike at the center of the distortion, a realization that the truth is always the thing that doesn't shine. The sound of the Weaver's movement is a high and jingling chime, making the air feel like it is filled with the shards of a broken sky. When the Weaver finally shatters into a pile of blue dust, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and reflective calm, a realization that the labyrinth is a place that punishes the distracted. Leaving the courtyard, the journey leads to the edge of the shifting staircase, a series of platforms that float in a dark blue void, connecting the labyrinth to the upper reaches of the territory. The atmosphere is vast, silent, and weightless, a realization that the Paintress has discarded the laws of gravity to create a path of pure will. This part of the history is a story of the floating logic, where the atmosphere is one of vertical risk and blue shadows. You see the way the stairs assemble themselves only when a foot is about to touch them, a sign that the path of the faithful is a place where you have to move before you can see. The air is cold, and carries the taste of salt and dry glass. The sound of the stairs locking together is a sharp and crystal click, signaling that the blue ascent is a place where every step is a new beginning. The walk through the corridor of the echoing numbers is a story of the mathematical grief. You encounter walls where the numbers 33, 32, and 31 have been carved in a repeating, interlocking pattern that hurts the eyes to look at. This is a moment of raw and logical sadness. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the labyrinth is a record of the Paintress's obsession with the Count. This part of the history is a story of the Sapphire Ledger, where the team must walk past the dates of their own erasure, seeing their lives turned into a blue equation. The sound of their boots on the glass floor is a dull and respectful thud, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is made of light and geometry. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand guiding his teammates through the visual traps of the numbers. Deep in the heart of the labyrinth camp, the final trial of the blue walls takes place as the team huddles together in a small and prism-like chamber. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and distorted, a realization that they cannot tell how much time has passed in a world without shadows. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared name, where they repeat their names and the names of their families out loud to keep the labyrinth from erasing their identities. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the messy, unpredictable streets of Lumiere and how they miss the comfort of a simple, straight road. The sound of the walls shifting in the distance is a lonely and deep note, signaling that the true enemy is the confusion that makes you forget who you are. The experience in the Cobalt Labyrinth ends with Gustave standing at the far exit of the shifting walls, looking toward the next region, the Mercury Pools. The blue of the stone has led to a sovereignty of the liquid silver. He carries the weight of the weaver's shard and the silence of the mirrors. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of changing states. The focus would now shift to the silver waters as the history prepared to follow the trail of the mirror into a world of liquid metal, heavy tides, and the weight of the reflection. The final legacy of the 13th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the unbroken line. You have seen the warriors walk through the blue and the glass to find the truth within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the mirror and the weight of the maze. As the sapphire glow of the labyrinth fades behind you and the first silver ripples of the pools appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the exit from the puzzle, leaving behind the geometric world for a world of liquid silver and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the rigid, shifting geometry of the labyrinth behind and reaches the edge of the Mercury Pools, a world of heavy, liquid silver that fills the low basins of the land like a sea of melted mirrors. This is a place where the paintress has experimented with the weight of reflection, creating a landscape that is both beautiful and toxic, where the very ground can turn to fluid and pull you into the deep. This part of the history is a story of the heavy tide, a realization that in the Silver Lands, your own image is a physical burden that can drown you. The atmosphere here is warm, metallic, and dense, and the air tastes of sulfur, quicksilver, and the sharp, chemical scent of a world that is permanently wet. The sound of the world is a low and sluggish rushing as the liquid metal moves against the stone shores with a weight that sounds like falling lead. Gustave leads the team across a series of floating obsidian plates, his boots finding a steady grip on the black glass as he looks out over the shimmering surface, realizing that in the pools, the danger is the surface that hides no secrets but offers no rest. As the team pushes across the liquid basins, the atmosphere shifts to one of submerged distortion. They find that the mercury doesn't just reflect the world, it mimics it, creating liquid shapes that rise from the pools to look like the members of the expedition. You see the way the silver ripples and hardens into the shape of a hand or a face, only to dissolve back into the tide a second later. This is the era of the metal mimic, where the atmosphere is one of fluid identity and constant pressure. This part of the history is a story of the silver echo, a realization that the paintress has used the pools to record the physical forms of everyone who has ever crossed this path. The sound of the mercury splashing against the rocks is a heavy and muffled thud, a sign that the land is thicker than water. Gustave moves with a sturdy and careful might, his eyes fixed on the far shore where the white towers of the sanctum begin to rise. Realizing that to touch the silver is to be weighed down by the history of the earth. Deep within the grotto of the heavy vapor, the atmosphere becomes hazy and suffocating. The group must wear their thickest leather masks to breathe, as the pools give off a thick, silver mist that coats everything in a layer of metallic dust. This is the trial of the weighted lung, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical fatigue and muffled vision. The warriors find that their armor feels twice as heavy in the thick air, a realization that the grotto is trying to turn their own strength against them. The sound of their own footsteps on the stone floor is a dull and resonant beat, making the grotto feel like the inside of a lead coffin. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the silver, they must move with the gravity of the world. He feels the steady pressure on the chest and the slippery grit on the skin, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the center of a wide, circular pool where the mercury is perfectly still, the group encounters the silver sentry, a creature made of liquid metal that has no fixed shape, shifting between a spiked beast and a wall of blades in a heartbeat. The fight is a story of the steel against the liquid. The atmosphere is violent, shimmering, and heavy as the sentry throws ripples of mercury that harden into spears midair, turning the peaceful pool into a forest of needles. This is the trial of the formless enemy, where the atmosphere becomes one of adaptability and sudden impacts. Gustave must use his blade to shatter the sentry when it hardens to strike, a realization that even a liquid has a moment of vulnerability. The sound of the sentry's movement is a low and rushing hiss, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of a falling sea. When the sentry finally dissolves into a harmless puddle of gray metal, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and silent calm, a realization that the pools are a place that demands a solid heart. Leaving the grotto, the journey leads to the edge of the mirror bridge, a narrow path made of hardened mercury that stretches across the largest of the pools. The atmosphere is vast, bright, and dizzying, a realization that the Paintress has used the bridge to force travelers to look at themselves for the entire crossing. This part of the history is a story of the final reflection, where the atmosphere is one of internal truth and external glare. You see the way the bridge reflects the sky and the water so perfectly that the warriors feel like they are walking through the center of a silver sphere. The air is warm and carries the taste of hot copper and dry ink. The sound of the bridge humming in the wind is a low and constant note, signaling that the path of the mirror is a place where you cannot hide from what you have become. The walk through the path of the sunken names is a story of the drowning year. You encounter areas where the mercury has receded to reveal the silver-coated statues of the 12th expedition, their bodies perfectly preserved in a layer of metal. This is a moment of raw and metallic grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the pools are a grave that never decays. This part of the history is a story of the Quicksilver Shroud, where the team must walk past the ghosts of their mission, seeing their own faces reflected in the silver skin of the fallen. The sound of their boots on the bridge is a sharp and respectful click, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world made of fluid. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand guiding his teammates through the blinding light of the reflections. Deep in the heart of the poolside camp, the final trial of the silver waters takes place as the team huddles together on a small and elevated stone ledge. The atmosphere is intimate, warm, and heavy, a realization that the mercury is slowly rising and falling with the tide of the Paintress's breath. This is a story of the sovereignty of the solid ground, where they treasure the feeling of the dry stone beneath them. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the simple wooden chairs of Lumiere and how they miss the comfort of a world that doesn't show you your own face in every shadow. The sound of the mercury lapping against the stone is a heavy and constant thrum, signaling that the true enemy is the weight that makes you want to stop climbing. The experience in the mercury pools ends with Gustave standing at the far exit of the basins, looking toward the next region, the Ivory Sanctum. The silver of the pools has led to a sovereignty of the bone white. He carries the weight of the sentry's shard and the silence of the mirrors. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of final architecture. The focus would now shift to the white walls, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the temple into a world of carved bone, sacred silence, and the weight of the god. The final legacy of the 14th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the solid form. You have seen the warriors walk through the silver and the mist to find the stone within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the vapor and the weight of the tide. As the silver glow of the pools fades behind you and the first white pillars of the sanctum appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the arrival at the gates. Leaving behind the liquid world for a world of bone, silence, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. Gemini said, "The journey moves beyond the shimmering weight of the mercury and enters the ivory sanctum, a place where the world is constructed from a material that looks like polished bone and bleached stone. This is the outer courtyard of the Paintress's palace, a region of sacred silence and architectural awe. The atmosphere here is bright, dry, and still, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a floor of smooth, white tiles that are warm to the touch, as if the building itself has a pulse. The air tastes of incense, ancient dust, and the sterile scent of a world that is scrubbed clean of all life. The sound of the world is a high and hollow ring, as every word spoken is caught by the vaulted ceilings and carried into the heights, making the expedition feel like they are walking through the ribs of a titan. Gustave leads the team under the massive ivory archways, his hand brushing against the carvings of forgotten saints and erased scholars, realizing that in the sanctum, the danger is the feeling that you are a smudge on a perfect page. As the team pushes through the grand plazas, the atmosphere shifts to one of judgmental grandeur. They find statues of the Paintress in her various forms, sometimes a young girl with a brush, sometimes an old woman with a scythe, all carved from a single piece of ivory. You see the way the light catches the intricate filigree of the walls, turning the shadows into a soft, cream-colored haze that makes the warriors feel like they are fading into the background. This is the era of the final witness, where the atmosphere is one of reverence and growing dread. This part of the history is a story of the gods' threshold, a realization that they have moved past the natural world and into the personal studio of their executioner. The sound of their own footsteps is a sharp and repeating note, a reminder that they are the only things in this hall that are not permanent. Gustave moves with a sturdy and humble might, his armor looking dull and battered against the pristine white of the stone, realizing that to be human in this place is to be a flaw. Deep within the gallery of the first numbers, the atmosphere becomes heavy and ancient. The group finds the original sketches for the numbers 1 through 10, rendered in a pigment that looks like dried blood on the ivory walls. This is the trial of the origin, where the atmosphere becomes one of historical weight and primal fear. The warriors find that the air grows colder near these marks, a realization that the first victims of the count still hold a grip on the land. The sound of the wind through the high, narrow windows is a low and haunting moan, making the gallery feel like the inside of a massive flute. This part of the history is a realization that the paintress has been perfect from the very first stroke. He feels the steady pressure in the chest and the dryness of the throat, a feeling of total and grounded somberness. At the center of a wide, circular dome, where the ceiling is painted with the map of the stars, the group encounters the Sanctum Arbiter, a creature that looks like a high priest made of white porcelain and flowing canvas, wielding a staff that drips with glowing gold ink. The fight is a story of the steel against the sacred. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and echoing, as the Arbiter speaks in a language that sounds like shattering glass, causing the floor tiles to rise and strike at the team. This is the trial of the divine defense, where the atmosphere becomes one of high focus and relentless pressure. Gustave must use the surrounding pillars for cover, a realization that the Arbiter is not fighting with strength, but with the authority of the building itself. The sound of the Arbiter's staff hitting the floor is a deep and final boom, making the air feel like it is vibrating with the voice of the mountain. When the Arbiter finally shatters into a cloud of white powder, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and expectant stillness, a realization that the house of the god is now aware of their presence. Leaving the dome, the journey leads to the edge of the Bridge of Sighs, a narrow path made of interlaced bone that crosses a deep chasm filled with the white ash of the first generations. The atmosphere is vast, cold, and empty, a realization that the paintress has built her palace on the remains of her very first ideas. This part of the history is a story of the foundation of loss, where the atmosphere is one of vertigo and deep resentment. You see the way the ash below moves in slow, white waves, looking like a sea of static. The air is thin and carries the taste of salt and old stone. The sound of the wind through the bone lattice is a high and whistling chord, signaling that the bridge of the past is a place where the dead are always under your feet. The walk through the hall of the silent prayers is a story of the fading hope. You encounter the kneeling statues of previous expeditions who reached the sanctum, but could not bring themselves to enter the inner palace. This is a moment of raw and spiritual grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the beauty of the sanctum is a trap designed to make you feel too small to fight back. This part of the history is a story of the Ivory Kneel, where the team must walk past the heroes of the 10th and 15th expeditions, seeing their final moments frozen in stone. The sound of their boots on the tiles is a sharp and respectful click, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world made of ghosts and art. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand guiding his teammates through the overwhelming silence of the hall. Deep in the heart of the sanctum camp, The final trial of the ivory walls takes place as the team huddles together in a small and secret alcove behind a massive statue. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and reverent, a realization that they are closer to the Paintress than anyone has been in 1,000 years. This is a story of the sovereignty of the mortal heart, where they whisper their stories of the dirt and the rain to keep the white silence from entering their souls. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the Paintress's palace is beautiful because it is empty, while their city is beautiful because it is full. The sound of a bell tolling in the distance is a deep and final note, signaling that the true enemy is the peace that comes with giving up. The experience in the ivory sanctum ends with Gustave standing at the far exit of the courtyards, looking toward the next region, the Vermilion Gate. The white of the bone has led to a sovereignty of the bloody red. He carries the weight of the Arbiter's staff and the silence of the sanctum. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is a path of the final threshold. The focus would now shift to the great red door, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the key into a world of violent color, heavy locks, and the entrance to the heart of the mystery. The final legacy of the 15th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the unbowed head. You have seen the warriors walk through the beauty and the bone to find the fire within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the light and the weight of the god. As the white glow of the sanctum fades behind you and the first red shadow of the gate appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the approach to the threshold, leaving behind the outer world for a world of blood, mystery, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the bone-white silence of the sanctum behind and arrives at the foot of the Vermilion Gate, a massive barrier that stands as the final physical wall between the world of men and the world of the Creator. This is a gate of violent contrast and heavy thresholds, a structure made of ancient, red-grained wood and reinforced with iron bands that look like the veins of a titan. The red here is not the dusty crimson of the desert, but a deep, saturated vermilion that feels like it was painted with the very first drop of color ever conceived. This part of the history is a story of the final lock, a realization that the door is not just a piece of architecture, but a test of the spirit's density. The atmosphere here is hot, vibrant, and heavy, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a dark, scorched stone that vibrates with the power of the gate. The air tastes of cedar, iron, and the sharp, metallic scent of fresh paint. The sound of the world is a low and constant hum, as if the gate is a giant heart beating against the chest of the mountain. Gustave leads the team to the base of the wood, his hand feeling the heat of the red grain, realizing that in the presence of the gate, the danger is the realization that you were never invited. As the team begins to inspect the massive locks, the atmosphere shifts to one of cryptic introspection. They find that the gate is covered in 3 giant circular dials, each one representing a different primary pigment: red, yellow, and blue. You see the way the light catches the rotating rings, turning the shadows into a kaleidoscope of shifting colors that make the warriors feel like they are being pulled into a prism. This is the era of the chromatic puzzle, where the atmosphere is one of mathematical art and visual strain. This part of the history is a story of the mixing of the years, a realization that the code to open the gate is hidden in the colors of the expeditions that came before them. The sound of the dials turning is a deep and grinding clack, a sign that the mechanism is as old as the counting itself. Gustave moves with a sturdy and careful might, his eyes tracking the alignment of the colors as the red glow of the gate tries to bleed the color out of his own skin. Deep within the mechanics of the hinge, the atmosphere becomes industrial and cramped. To reach the inner springs of the gate, the group must climb through the hollow spaces between the wood and the iron, where the gears are the size of houses. This is the trial of the great machine, where the atmosphere becomes one of mechanical pressure and narrow gaps. The warriors find that the air is filled with the scent of hot oil and ancient sawdust, a realization that the gate is a living thing that needs constant energy to stay closed. The sound of the wood groaning under the weight of the iron is a low and haunting creak, making the hinges feel like the inside of a massive ribcage. This part of the history is a realization that to open the door, they must become the key themselves. He feels the steady pulse in the fingertips and the heat of the friction against his palms, a feeling of total and grounded effort. At the center of a small, circular courtyard directly in front of the lock, the group encounters the gatekeeper's shadow, a creature made of black ink and red sparks that has no face, only a single eye that matches the color of the gate. The fight is a story of the steel against the shadow. The atmosphere is violent, red, and fast, as the shadow moves through the wood of the gate itself, striking from the grain and vanishing before a blow can land. This is the trial of the pure sight, where the atmosphere becomes one of hyper-awareness and rapid response. Gustave must strike the shadow exactly when it overlaps with the iron bands, a realization that the darkness can only be caught by the metal. The sound of the shadow's strike is a sharp and sizzling snap, making the air feel like it is filled with the static of a storm. When the shadow finally dissolves into a puddle of black wash, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and vibrating stillness, a realization that the gate is ready to listen. Leaving the courtyard, the journey leads to the final alignment of the dials, where the colors of the past and the colors of the present must meet. The atmosphere is vast, bright, and final, a realization that the Paintress has used the gate to filter out those who do not understand the weight of the brush. This part of the history is a story of the final combination, where the atmosphere is one of tense success and visual harmony. You see the way the red, yellow, and blue rings lock together to form a blinding white light that illuminates the entire canyon. The air is hot and carries the taste of ozone and burnt wood. The sound of the gate's main bolt sliding back is a deep and thunderous boom, signaling that the threshold of the world has finally been crossed. The walk through the open doorway is a story of the sudden void. You encounter a hallway that is perfectly black, a space where the color of the gate cannot reach. This is a moment of raw and sensory shock. The atmosphere is silent and weightless, a realization that the gate was the last thing that made sense in the world of men. This part of the history is a story of the black hallway, where the team must walk by touch, feeling the transition from the wood of the gate to the smooth, cold stone of the inner sanctum. The sound of their own heartbeats is the only thing that fills the space, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that has lost its dimensions. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand leading his team into the dark, knowing that what lies on the other side is the end of all numbers. Deep in the heart of the threshold, the final trial of the gate takes place as the team huddles together in the last second of the red light. The atmosphere is intimate, tense, and sacred, a realization that the gate is closing behind them and there is no going back. This is a story of the sovereignty of the final breath, where they look at each other one last time before the light of the outside world is gone forever. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the gate was not just a barrier, but a protector for the world they left behind. The sound of the wood hitting the stone as the door shuts is a deep and final note, signaling that the true enemy is the fear of what happens when the door is locked from the inside. The experience at the Vermilion Gate ends with Gustave standing in the absolute darkness of the inner hallway, looking toward the first faint light of the next region, the painter's studio. The red of the wood has led to a sovereignty of the first stroke. He carries the weight of the shadow's eye and the silence of the threshold. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is now a path of the creator's heart. The focus would now shift to the inner rooms, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the ink into a world of wet canvas, floating colors, and the face of the one who counts. The final legacy of the 16th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the final turn. You have seen the warriors walk through the wood and the iron to find the key within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the red light and the weight of the choice. As the vermilion glow of the gate fades behind you and the first cold blue of the inner studio appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the crossing of the door, leaving behind the physical world for a world of creation, mystery, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey moves beyond the threshold of the gate and into the painter's studio, a place that defies the the logic of the natural world and exists as a sprawling, surreal workshop of the gods. This is a region of floating creation and fluid reality, where the floor is not stone, but a series of massive, horizontal canvases that drift through a void of deep indigo. The atmosphere here is cool, humid, and electric, and the air tastes of wet linseed oil, crushed minerals, and the sharp, metallic tang of fresh pigment. The sound of the world is a low and constant swish, as if giant brushes are moving through the air just out of sight, making the entire studio feel like a colossal, living artwork that is still being dried. Gustave leads the team across the first drifting canvas, his boots leaving faint, blue footprints on the white fabric. Realizing that in the studio, the danger is the realization that your own body is just another medium to be shaped. As the team navigates the floating platforms, the atmosphere shifts to one of chromatic vertigo. They find rivers of wet paint that flow through the air like ribbons of liquid light, vibrant yellows, deep magentas, and stinging cyans that wrap around the pillars of the studio. You see the way the light refracts through these liquid streams, casting moving shadows that look like half-formed sketches of people and animals. This is the era of the unbound stroke, where the atmosphere is one of infinite potential and terrifying change. This part of the history is a story of the wet canvas, a realization that the paintress has the power to erase or redraw them with a single thought. The sound of the paint rushing past is a soft and gurgling thrum, a sign that the very blood of the world is exposed here. Gustave moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand gripping the edge of the floating frames as the shifting colors of the void try to dissolve his sense of up and down. Deep within the gallery of the first drafts, the atmosphere becomes haunting and unfinished. The group finds giant, translucent sheets of vellum hanging from the ceiling, each one containing a sketch of a city or a person that was never brought to life. This is the trial of the abandoned idea, where the atmosphere becomes one of melancholic beauty and visual confusion. The warriors must walk through these ghostly layers, a realization that for every person who exists, there are 1,000 who were never painted. The sound of the vellum rustling in the psychic wind is a high and paper-thin whisper, making the gallery feel like the inside of a giant sketchbook. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the studio, they must hold onto the weight of the real in a world of ghosts. He feels the damp chill on the face and the steady vibration of the air against his skin, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the center of a wide, circular platform made of hardened black ink, the group encounters the canvas guardian, a creature that looks like a man-shaped void cut out of the world, trailing long ribbons of multicolored paint that act like whips. The fight is a story of the steel against the abstract. The atmosphere is violent, fluid, and blurring, as the guardian changes its shape to match the weapons of the expedition, turning the black floor into a chaotic splash of color. This is the trial of the constant adaptation, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast reflexes and mental resilience. Gustave must strike at the ribbons of paint to weaken the central void, a realization that even a shadow needs a source. The sound of the guardian's strike is a deep and liquid thud, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of a falling ocean. When the guardian finally dissolves into a harmless puddle of gray wash, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and silent calm, a realization that the studio is a place that demands a clear outline. Leaving the ink platform, the journey leads to the edge of the Rainbow Fall, a place where all the colors of the studio merge into a single, blinding waterfall of white light that drops into the abyss. The atmosphere is vast, roaring, and translucent, a realization that the paintress has used the falls to recycle the colors of the world. This part of the history is a story of the liquid spectrum, where the atmosphere is one of prismatic brilliance and spiritual weight. You see the way the white light splits into 1,000 different hues as it hits the bottom, creating a mist of pure color that coats the warrior's armor in a shimmering film. The air is warm and carries the taste of sugar and sharp ozone. The sound of the light hitting the void is a high and constant ringing, signaling that the core of the creation is a place of absolute and terrifying energy. The walk through the corridor of the unpainted years is a story of the future silence. You encounter canvases that are completely blank, but they hum with the potential energy of the numbers, yet to be painted 34, 35, and 36. This is a moment of raw and prophetic grief. The atmosphere is somber and expectant, a realization that the studio is the place where the death of the future is planned. This part of the history is a story of the white potential, where the team must walk past the empty frames of their children's lives, seeing the space where their history should be written. The sound of their boots on the canvas floor is a soft and muffled thud, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is still waiting to be born. He moves with a sturdy and balanced grace, his hand checking the hilt of his sword to remind himself that he is still a man of iron and bone. Deep in the heart of the studio camp, the final trial of the floating canvases takes place as the team huddles together on a small and stable frame, drifting near the center of the void. The atmosphere is intimate, ethereal, and tense, a realization that they are floating in the middle of a god's mind. This is a story of the sovereignty of the living ink, where they use their own blood to mark the canvas beneath them, a way of proving they are more than just a painting. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they talk about the solid, unmoving mountains of their youth, and how they miss the comfort of a world that doesn't change when you close your eyes. The sound of the paint rivers rushing in the distance is a low and constant moan, signaling that the true enemy is the fluidity that makes your own life feel like a dream. The experience in the painter's studio ends with Gustave standing at the far edge of the drifting frames, looking toward the next region, the Gallery of Souls. colors of the studio have led to a sovereignty of the human form. He carries the weight of the guardian's ink and the silence of the vellum. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the paintress is now a path of the final portrait. The focus would now shift to the wall of faces, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the count into a world of eyes, memories, and the final resting place of the erased. The final legacy of the 17th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the fixed outline. You have seen the warriors walk through the paint and the void to find the solid heart within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the light and the weight of the potential. As the multicolored glow of the studio fades behind you and the first gray faces of the gallery appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the approach to the portrait, leaving behind the fluid world for a world of memory, identity, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey moves beyond the fluid chaos of the studio and enters the gallery of souls, a region of infinite witness and frozen memory. This is a place where the walls are not made of stone or wood, but of millions of gold-framed portraits that stretch upward into a dark, vaulted ceiling that has no end. Each frame contains a living image of someone erased by the paintress, their faces moving in a slow, silent loop of their final moments. This part of the history is a story of the collective stare, a realization that the expedition is no longer walking through a landscape, but through a crowd of ghosts. The atmosphere here is cool, solemn, and suffocating, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a floor of black glass that reflects the faces from the walls, making it feel like they are walking on the heads of the fallen. The air tastes of old paper, dried lavender, and the sharp, ozone scent of a thunderstorm that never breaks. The sound of the world is a low and constant murmur, the combined whisper of millions of mouths moving at once without voices, making the entire gallery feel like a colossal, living grave. Gustave leads the team down the narrow aisles of gold frames, his hand covering his mouth to filter the dust of the ages, realizing that in the gallery, the danger is the weight of being watched by those you failed to save. As the team pushes through the corridors of faces, the atmosphere shifts to one of historical vertigo. They find sections dedicated to specific years, seeing the massive blocks of frames for the numbers 10, 20, and 30. You see the way the expressions change from the early years of confusion to the later years of resigned terror. This is the era of the total record, where the atmosphere is one of crushing grief and visual overload. This part of the history is a story of the witnessed path, a realization that every step they take is being judged by the eyes of their ancestors. The sound of their own footsteps is a sharp and echoing snap against the glass floor, a noise that seems to make the portraits turn their heads in unison. Gustave moves with a sturdy and balanced might, his eyes fixed straight ahead to avoid finding the faces of his own parents in the rows, realizing that to look too closely at the past is to be pulled into a frame yourself. Deep within the chamber of the unnamed, the atmosphere becomes dense and nameless. The group finds thousands of blank canvases where the paint has run together into a gray blur, representing those who were forgotten so completely that even the paintress could not keep their likeness. This is the trial of the erased identity, where the atmosphere becomes one of existential dread and muffled senses. The warriors find that their own reflections in the glass floor begin to fade, a realization that the gallery is trying to claim their names before they reach the end. The sound of the wind through the empty frames is a high and hollow whistle, making the chamber feel like the inside of a dead lung. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the souls, they must shout their own names into the silence. He feels the cold sweat on the brow and the steady ache in the heart, a feeling of total and grounded resistance. At the center of a wide, octagonal plaza where the portraits are 10 stories high, the group encounters the soul terror, a creature made of tangled gold frames and tattered canvas that moves with a jerky, stop-motion grace. The fight is a story of the steel against the memory. The atmosphere is violent, golden, and screaming as the creature hurls shards of glass and fragments of faces at the team, each one carrying a psychic burst of someone else's sorrow. This is the trial of the emotional armor, where the atmosphere becomes one of psychic pressure and physical speed. Gustav must strike the central frame of the creature, which shows a reflection of his own face, a realization that the monster is built from his own fear of being forgotten. The sound of the frames breaking is a sharp and grating crash, making the air feel like it is filled with the shards of 1,000 lives. When the terror finally falls apart into a heap of wood and glass, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and exhausted stillness, a realization that the gallery is a place that feeds on regret. Leaving the plaza, the journey leads to the edge of the bridge of the first number, a narrow path that crosses a chasm filled with the very first portraits ever painted. The atmosphere is vast, ancient, and dark, a realization that the paintress has kept the original victims as the foundation for everything else. This part of the history is a story of the root of the count, where the atmosphere is one of primal sorrow and deep shadows. You see the way the portraits at the bottom are cracked and fading, their colors turning to the color of bone. The air is cold and carries the taste of salt and dry earth. The sound of the voices from the chasm is a low and rhythmic thrum, signaling that the heart of the gallery is a place where the first scream is still echoing. The walk through the hall of the final 33 is a story of the waiting frame. You encounter a section of the wall that is completely empty except for 33 gold frames, each one carved with the name of a member of the current expedition. This is a moment of raw and final reality. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that their place in the gallery has already been prepared. This part of the history is a story of the empty square, where the team must walk past their own names, seeing the space where their faces will be painted if they fail. The sound of their boots on the glass is a dull and respectful thud, making Gustave feel solid and heavy in a world that is waiting to turn him into a picture. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand touching the frame with his name on it, leaving a smear of dirt on the perfect gold as a mark of his defiance. Deep in the heart of the gallery camp, the final trial of the souls takes place as the team huddles together in a circle of shared light beneath the empty frames. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and resolute, a realization that they are the only living things in a world of 1 billion dead. This is a story of the sovereignty of the living breath, where they tell stories of the things that can never be painted: the smell of a cooking fire, the feeling of a handshake, the sound of a joke. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the Paintress can capture their faces, but she can never capture the way they feel about each other. The sound of the million whispers in the walls is a low and constant sigh, signaling that the true enemy is the desire to stop being a person and start being a memory. The experience in the Gallery of Souls ends with Gustave standing at the far exit of the gold-lined halls, looking toward the final region, the Paintress's throne. The gold of the frames has led to a sovereignty of the final stroke. He carries the weight of the terror's shard and the silence of the million eyes. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Paintress is now a path of the final confrontation. The focus would now shift to the white seat, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the artist into a world of pure light, final choices, and the face of the one who started the count. The final legacy of the 18th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the unblinking eye. You have seen the warriors walk through the ghosts and the gold to find the identity within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the glass and the weight of the stare. As the golden glow of the gallery fades behind you and the first blinding light of the throne room appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the exit from the past, leaving behind the world of portraits for a world of the present, the Creator, and a journey that continues to pulse with the remaining years. The journey leaves the suffocating weight of the million eyes behind and enters the throne of the Creator, a place where the world finally strips away its complexity to reveal a blinding, terrifying simplicity. This is the heart of the mountain, a chamber of infinite white and absolute power, where there are no walls, only a horizon that goes on forever in every direction. The atmosphere here is cold, silent, and pure, and the ground beneath the expedition's boots is a surface of white marble so flawless it feels like standing on a cloud. The air tastes of mountain peaks, fresh water, and the sharp, electric scent of a storm that is held in place by a single will. The sound of the world is a single, deep, and constant hum, the vibration of the universe itself, making the expedition feel like they are walking through the mind of a god. Gustave leads the team toward the center of the void, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword, so tight his knuckles are as white as the floor. Realizing that in the throne room, the danger is the realization that your entire life was just a mark on someone else's paper. As the team approaches the center of the infinite space, the atmosphere shifts to one of holy tension. They find a single wooden stool and a massive, upright canvas that reaches into the clouds, and sitting there is the Paintress. She does not look like a monster or a giant. She looks like a tired woman with paint-stained fingers and eyes that have seen every sunrise since the world began. You see the way she holds her brush, her movements slow and deliberate as she mixes a pot of black ink that seems to swallow the light. This is the era of the final count, where the atmosphere is one of inevitable endings and quiet authority. This part of the history is a story of the last number, a realization that the 33 years of their lives were just the time it took for her to finish a specific detail in the background of her masterpiece. The sound of the brush against the canvas is a soft and rhythmic scratch, a noise that carries the weight of every person who has ever disappeared. Gustave moves with a sturdy and final might, his armor clanking in the silence like a heartbeat in a tomb. Realizing that the woman before him is not evil, but simply finished with them. Deep within the circle of the final stroke, the atmosphere becomes dense and timeless. The group finds that as they get closer to the Paintress, their movements slow down, as if the air itself is turning into thick, drying oil. This is the trial of the stilled heart, where the atmosphere becomes one of paralytic awe and physical struggle. The warriors find that it takes every ounce of their strength just to lift a foot or blink an eye, a realization that the Paintress is painting their stillness in real time. The sound of their own breathing is a loud and raspy labor, making the circle feel like the inside of a drying painting. This part of the history is a realization that to reach her, they must move through the ink of their own destiny. He feels the heavy resistance of the air and the steady burn of the will in his chest, a feeling of total and grounded defiance. At the edge of the canvas, the group encounters the Paintress's final guard, a creature made of every color they have seen on their journey: the red of the desert, the blue of the sea, the gold of the orchard, all swirling together into a chaotic, shifting mass of light. The fight is a story of the steel against the spectrum. The atmosphere is violent, blinding, and overwhelming. As the guard lashes out with bursts of pure pigment that try to rewrite the bodies of the expedition, turning skin to stone or blood to ink. This is the trial of the immutable soul, where the atmosphere becomes one of spiritual anchoring and absolute focus. Gustave must strike through the colors to find the white void at the center, a realization that the only way to defeat the art is to return it to the blank page. The sound of the guard's movement is a thunderous and harmonic roar, making the air feel like it is filled with the sound of the world crashing down. When the guard finally dissipates into a cloud of white mist, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and terrifying silence, a realization that there is nothing left between them and the brush. Leaving the battlefield, the journey leads to the foot of the stool, where the paintress finally turns to look at them. Her eyes are not filled with hate, but with a profound and distant exhaustion, a realization that she has been counting for so long she has forgotten how to stop. This part of the history is a story of the dialogue of the erased, where the atmosphere is one of raw humanity and divine burden. You see the way she looks at Gustave, recognizing the weight he carries, and for a moment, the brush trembles in her hand. The air is cold and carries the taste of salt and finality. The sound of her voice is a soft and dust-like whisper, signaling that the heart of the Count is a place of deep and lonely sorrow. The walk to the canvas is a story of the final choice. Gustave sees the number 33 half-formed on the white fabric, the black ink still wet and dripping like a tear. This is a moment of raw and existential grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the paintress is waiting for them to accept their place in the record. This part of the history is a story of the broken brush, where Gustave must decide whether to strike the woman who created him, or to ask her why she started the Count in the first place. The sound of his boots on the marble is a sharp and final thud, making him feel solid and heavy in a world that is ready to become a memory. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his sword lowered, but his head held high, looking into the eyes of the one who owns his years. Deep in the heart of the throne room, the final trial of the paintress takes place as the team stands in a line of 33 before the canvas. The atmosphere is intimate, sacred, and final, a realization that the Count is at its absolute end. This is a story of the sovereignty of the living second, where they refuse to look away as the brush moves toward the cloth. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as Gustave tells the paintress about the city of Lumiere, about the children playing in the gray dust, and the old men drinking tea in the sun, things she can never capture with a stroke of ink. The sound of the ink hitting the canvas is a deep and final note, signaling that the true enemy is the belief that a life is only worth what can be recorded. The experience in the throne of the Creator ends with Gustave reaching out to touch the wet ink of his own number, his hand staining the perfection of the paintress's work. The white of the throne has led to a sovereignty of the human mark. He carries the weight of the expedition's journey and the silence of the god. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the paintress was never about stopping the Count, but about proving that they existed at all. The focus would now shift to the final act, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the choice into the world that comes after the numbers. The final legacy of the 19th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the final word. You have seen the warriors walk through the world, and the void to find the voice within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the light and the weight of the brush. As the white glow of the throne room begins to swirl with the colors of a new world, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 finds its final and grounded resolution in the touch of the canvas, leaving behind the world of the Count for a world that is finally and truly their own. The journey reaches its end at the very center of the white void, where the silence is so thick it feels like a physical weight against the chest. This is the moment of the final stroke, the point where the history of Expedition 33 ceases to be a march and becomes a choice. The Paintress stands before the canvas, her brush poised just inches away from the black ink of the number 33, her face a mask of ancient, weary duty. This part of the history is a story of the broken cycle, a realization that some things are so beautiful they must be allowed to die so that something new can grow. The atmosphere here is stark, cold, and absolute, and the ground beneath Gustave's boots is no longer marble or stone, but the raw, unpainted substance of reality itself. The air tastes of mountain snow and the metallic tang of a heart that has been pushed to its limit. The sound of the world is a single, fatting note, the last vibration of a bell that has been ringing for 1,000 years. Gustave steps forward, his shadow falling across the wet ink of the canvas, realizing that in the end, the only way to save the world is to stop trying to preserve it. As Gustave moves into the space between the goddess and her work, the atmosphere shifts to one of quiet defiance. He does not draw his sword to strike the woman. Instead, he reaches out his hand and grips the wooden handle of the brush itself. You see the way the black ink drips onto his leather glove, staining the ivory floor with a dark, messy trail that looks like a vein of coal in a snowfield. This is the era of the human hand, where the atmosphere is one of intimacy and rupture. This part of the history is a story of the shared burden, a realization that the Paintress has been as much a prisoner of the Count as the people of Lumiere. The sound of the brush snapping in half is a sharp and dry crack, a noise that echoes through the infinite white like a gunshot. It is the sound of 1,000 years of logic being discarded in a single second. Gustave moves with a sturdy and grounded grace, his eyes locked onto the tired eyes of the creator, realizing that by breaking the brush, he is setting them both free. Deep within the collapse of the painted world, the atmosphere becomes chaotic and bright. As the brush breaks, the ink on the canvas begins to run, blurring the numbers from 1 to 33 into a single, swirling storm of gray wash. This is the trial of the Great Reset, where the atmosphere becomes one of dissolving boundaries and sensory overload. The warriors of the expedition find themselves being pulled into the colors, their armor and their memories mixing with the landscapes they have traveled through, the red dunes, the blue seas, and the golden orchards, all merging into a single, vibrant tapestry. The sound of the world unraveling is a deep and rushing hum, making the throne room feel like the inside of a whirlwind. This part of the history is a realization that to create a future, the past must be allowed to bleed together. He feels the steady heat of the transformation and the weight of the void lifting from his shoulders, a feeling of total and grounded release. At the center of the swirling colors, the paintress begins to fade, her form turning into a cloud of white petals and silver mist. She offers a final, silent nod to Gustave, a realization that her work is finally done. The fight is over. It was never a story of the blade against the god, but the heart against the count. The atmosphere is somber, peaceful, and vast, as the white void begins to fill with the honest, messy colors of a world that is no longer controlled by a brush. This is the trial of the new dawn, where the atmosphere becomes one of uncertainty and hope. Gustave stands alone in the center of the changing light, a realization that he is the first man in a millennium who does not know how long he has left to live. The sound of the silence that follows is a soft and natural stillness, making the air feel like it is filled with the breath of the morning. When the white room finally vanishes, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and fresh earthiness, a realization that they are back on the ground. The return to the surface is a story of the first rain. Gustave and the survivors of the 33rd expedition find themselves standing on the cliffs overlooking the Valley of Lumiere. The city is no longer gray, the dust has settled, and for the first time, the sky above the stone walls is a pale, natural blue. The atmosphere is vast, cool, and living, a realization that the paintress is gone and the world has been returned to the hands of the people. This part of the history is a story of the unnamed year, where the atmosphere is one of renewal and humble beginnings. You see the way the people come out of their houses, looking up at a sun that will not count them down. The air is damp and carries the taste of wet stone and growing grass. The sound of the city waking up is a low and musical clatter, signaling that the song of the free is a messy, beautiful noise. The walk through the gates of Lumiere is a story of the hardened peace. Gustave encounters the children who will never have a number painted on their foreheads, their faces bright with a future that has no expiration date. This is a moment of raw and grounded joy. The atmosphere is bright and still, a realization that the sacrifice of the expeditions was the soil in which this new world was planted. This part of the history is a story of the broken sword, where Gustave hangs his blade on the wall of the city square, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the time for fighting the shadow is over. The sound of his boots on the honest, gray cobblestones is a dull and respectful thump, making him feel solid and heavy in a world that is finally real. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl who asks him what the color red looks like, and he smiles, knowing he has all the time in the world to tell her. Deep in the heart of the new city, the final legacy of Gustave and his team is etched into a single, unpolished block of stone. There are no gold frames, and no ivory carvings, just the names of the 33 who went into the mountain and the one who broke the brush. The atmosphere is intimate, warm, and human, a realization that they are no longer a part of a divine record, but a part of a living memory. This is a story of the sovereignty of the mortal life, where the greatest victory is simply the ability to grow old and be forgotten by the stars. The conversation around the city fires is a moment of grounded humanity, as the people talk about the planting of the first crops and the building of the first roads that lead beyond the valley. The sound of a hammer hitting a nail in the distance is a sharp and hopeful note, signaling that the true enemy was never the Paintress, but the fear of the unknown. The experience of Expedition 33 ends with Gustave sitting on a wooden bench at the edge of the valley, watching the moon rise over the peaks. The white of the Count has led to a sovereignty of the natural night. He carries the weight of the broken wood and the silence of the mountain. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened peace, a realization that the journey was always about the first step into the dark. The focus has now shifted from the count of the years to the flow of the days, as the history finds its final and grounded resolution in the simple act of breathing. The final legacy of the 20th part of the expedition is a story of the strength in the simple end. You have seen the warriors walk through the paint and the bone to find the humanity within their own spirits. You have felt the sting of the ink and the weight of the choice. As the light of the old world fades into the shadows of the new, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Expedition 33 is finished, leaving behind the world of the numbers for a world of the sun, the rain, and a journey that finally, at long last, has found its home in the quiet earth.